What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is July 11th, 2026, about 6:10 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are concluding, we are finishing, we are crossing the checkered black and white flag line to complete Leon Trotsky's The History of the Russian Revolution. We started reading this book about a month and a half ago. This has been the longest book that we've ever read for the Book to React series, the open source book club and library, where everybody is welcome to join in and converse and discuss these books that we are reading with the people. And this by far has been one of the most fascinating books I've ever picked up. I never imagined I would read this book, especially at this late age in my life. I'm 35 years old. I feel old, and I feel like this is a book I should have tackled in my early 20s if I was going to be so dedicated to the cause of socialism and communism. But I'm glad that I read this book. I'm so glad that we are reaching the end of this book. Thank you to everybody who's been joining in and supporting the content. This has been one of the most successful and biggest book reacts I have ever done. So thank you so much to everybody who's been enjoying the content, supporting the content, leaving comments, subscribing to the channel, sharing the content, all things like that. But most importantly, hopefully you learned something from this experience. And by the end of today's episode, which today is episode 47, I believe, after we read chapter 46 and the conclusion of Leon Trotsky's book, I will give my final comments. I pretty much have three things that are my main takeaways from this book, and I would be very, very interested to know what are your takeaways after going on this journey together. I have both live streams going. We have the horizontal live stream, and we also have the vertical live stream going. So please make sure you read the pinned comments so that way your comments will be read, and I will respond to comments that are related to the text. I guess I'll start today with the first question that anybody can answer. If you're tuning in right now, if you're looking in my motherfucking eyes right now, I want to ask you a question. Has reading this book changed your mind or changed your perspective on any aspect of the 1917 Russian Revolution? I would like to know if anybody's mind has been changed, perspective has been changed regarding the facts of what happened on October 25th in 1917 in Petrograd. Be very interested to know. Looking forward to reading. Let's jump into it. Chapter 46, the Congress of the Soviet Dictatorship. In Smolny, on the 25th of October, the most democratic of all parliaments in the world's history was to meet. Who knows? Perhaps also the most important. Having got free of the influence of compromisist intellectuals, the local Soviets had sent up, for the most part, workers and soldiers. The majority of them were people without big names, but who had proved themselves in action and won lasting confidence in their own localities. From the active army, it was almost exclusively rank-and-file soldiers who had run the blockade of army committees and headquarters and come here as delegates. A majority of them had begun to live a political life with the revolution. They had been formed by an experience of 8 months. They knew little, but knew it well. The outward appearance of the Congress proclaimed its makeup. The officers' chevrons, the eyeglasses and neckties of intellectuals to be seen at the first Congress had almost completely disappeared. A gray color prevailed uninterruptedly in costumes and in faces. All had worn out their clothes during the war. Many of the city workers had provided themselves with soldiers' coats. The trench delegates were by no means a pretty picture. Long, unshaven, in old torn trench coats with heavy papaki on their disheveled hair, often with cotton sticking out through a hole. I believe the papaki was a type of hat. The hats that people would wear, especially the poors. The peasants. White, coarse, weather-beaten faces, heavy, cracked hands, fingers yellowed with tobacco, buttons torn off, belts hanging loose, and long, unoiled boots wrinkled and rusty. The plebeian nation had for the first time sent up an honest representation, made in its own image and not retouched. Very interesting what Trotsky is saying here. What he's saying is that, this Congress that they put together after taking over the Winter Palace and the successful October insurrection, essentially, the Congress of people who were supposed to be representing the people in the government are now really made up of the people. Before, it was people dressed like me, suits, ties, nicely manicured fingers, all lotioned up and looking very sophisticated and dapper. And now the Congress is made up of the actual people. Now the Congress is made up of the actual soldiers, the actual workers, the actual people who had actually, been helping build the nation with their blood, sweat, and tears and bare hands. Very inspiring and a very powerful image. A very powerful image we should keep in mind. Continuing here. The statistics of this Congress, which assembled during the hours of insurrection, are very incomplete. At the moment of opening, there were 650 delegates with votes. 390 fell to the lot of the Bolsheviks. By no means all members of the party, but they were of the flesh and blood of the masses. And the masses had no roads left but the Bolshevik road. Many of the delegates who had brought doubts with them were maturing fast in the red-hot atmosphere of Petrograd. How completely had the Mensheviks and social revolutionaries squandered the political capital of the February Revolution. At the June Congress of Soviets, the compromisers had a majority of 600 votes out of the whole number of 832 delegates. Now the compromisist opposition of all shades made up less than a quarter of the Congress. The Mensheviks, with the national group adhering to them, amounted to only 80 members, about half of them lefts. Out of 159 social revolutionaries, according to other reports, 190, about 3/5 were lefts. And moreover, the right continued to melt fast during the very sitting of the Congress. Toward the end, the total number of delegates, according to several lists, reached 900. But this figure, while including a number of advisory members, does not, on the other hand, include all those with votes. The registration was carried on intermittently. Documents have been lost. The information about party affiliations was incomplete. In any case, the dominant position of the Bolsheviks in the Congress remains indubitable. Very interesting what Trotsky is laying out here. And I think one of Trotsky's main arguments is that sort of in 1917, because Russia did not have a developed bourgeoisie, they did not have a strong capitalist class, what they had was an opportunity to jump directly to socialism. And that's one of the main departures of just orthodox Marxism to Leninism. We don't need a bourgeois revolution or bourgeois state capture. Just let the people automatically continue the march towards socialism. And what he's saying here is that after February, when the workers, the soldiers, the peasants, overthrew the government of the Tsar initially, the Mensheviks, the social revolutionaries, the compromisers in general, those who were seeking a happy medium between proletarian rule and bourgeois rule, they had the majority of the people. Because what's another argument Trotsky has made throughout this book? The nature of man is naturally conservative. Most people don't want war the same way they don't want revolution. Yet and still, they will continue. They will continue to advocate for what is in their best interest. And if the means to get to that end are war or revolution, then that's what it shall be. Okay, so very interesting. He's saying that the Mensheviks and social revolutionaries dropped the ball. And I believe also one more thing, that Trotsky's main argument in this book is that when a society is not captured by the bourgeoisie, the party that will be most successful is the one that keeps up to the radical demands of the people. So at first, the people trust their radical demands in the hands of the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries, but the people continue to move further left, and the only ones that could keep up with the people in their radical demands were the Bolsheviks. That's what I have to say. Continuing here. A straw vote taken among the delegates revealed that 505 Soviets stood for the transfer of all power to the Soviets, 86 for a government of the democracy, 55 for a coalition, 21 for a coalition, but without the cadets. Although eloquent even in this form, these figures give an exaggerated idea of the remains of the compromisers' influence. Those for democracy and coalition were Soviets from the more backward districts and least important points. From early in the morning of the 25th, caucuses of the factions were held in Smolny. Only those attended the Bolshevik caucus Only those attended the Bolshevik caucus who were free from fighting duties. The opening of the Congress was delayed. The Bolshevik leaders wanted to finish with the Winter Palace first, but the opposing factions too were in no hurry. They themselves had to decide what to do, and that was not easy. Hours passed. Sub-factions were disputing within the factions. The split among the social revolutionaries took place after a resolution to withdraw from the Congress had been rejected by 92 votes against 60. It was only late in the evening that the right and left social revolutionaries began to sit in different rooms. At 8 o'clock, the Mensheviks demanded a new delay. They had too many opinions. Night came on. The operations at the Winter Palace were dragging out, but it became impossible to wait longer. It was necessary to say some clear word to the aroused and watchful nation. The revolution had taught the art of filling space. Delegates, guests, guards jammed into the commencement hall of the noble maidens, making room for more and more. Warnings of the dangers of the floors collapsing had no effect. Nor did appeals to smoke a little less. All crowded closer and smoked twice as much. John Reed, with difficulty, fought his way through the noisy crowd around the doors. The hall was not heated, but the air was heavy and hot. Who is this guy, John Reed? Like, he said he was an American reporter, but it's very funny how Trotsky just drops this, like, sort of American, like, I guess sort of like windswept type of hair, guy just in the middle of the story. You know what I'm saying? I guess Trotsky also had the mind of a screenwriter. And I guess he could picture telling this story to an American audience. But Americans, we only like movies where guys who look like Michael J. Fox are like the main role. So I guess that's why he dropped this guy, John Reed, because this guy is just all over the book, randomly sprinkled in, like the anarchist, like the random slurs for Jewish people. It's very, very weird how Trotsky writes sometimes. John Reed was here. Like, okay. Anyway. Shout out to Mukes Kahan. He says, nice suit, thank you. But my question is not about my suit, Mukes Chahan. My question is, has reading this book, if you have been following along, has it changed your opinion at all of the 1917 October Revolution in Russia? Continuing here. Jamming the entries and the side exits, sitting on all the window sills, the delegates now patiently await the president's gong. Tsatsarelli, Chedsey, Chernov, none of them is on the platform. Only leaders of the second rank have come to their funeral. A short man in the uniform of a military doctor opens the session at 10:40 in the evening in the name of the executive committee. The Congress, he says, assembles in such exceptional circumstances that he, Dan, obeying the directions of the Central Executive Committee, will refrain from making a political speech. His party friends are now indeed under fire in the Winter Palace, while loyally fulfilling their duty as ministers. The last thing these delegates are expecting is a blessing from the Central Executive Committee. They look up at the platform with hostility. If those people still exist politically, what have they got to do with us and our business? In the name of the Bolsheviks, a Moscow delegate, Avanesov, moves that the presidium be elected upon a proportional basis. 14 Bolsheviks, 7 social revolutionaries, 3 Mensheviks, and 1 internationalist. The right immediately declines to enter the presidium. Martov's group sits tight for the time being. It has not decided. 7 votes go over to the left social revolutionaries. The Congress watches these introductory conflicts with a scowl. Avanesov announces the Bolshevik candidates for the presidium: Lenin, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Rykov, Nogin, Sliansky, Krylenko, Antonov, Ovensenko, Ryazanov, Muranov, Lunacharsky, Kollontai, Stuchka. The Presidium, writes Sukhanov, consisted of the principal Bolshevik leaders and 6, in reality 7, left social revolutionaries. Zinoviev and Kamenev were included in the Presidium as authoritative party names in spite of their active opposition to the insurrection. Rykov and Nogin as representatives of the Moscow Soviet. Lunacharsky and Kollontai as popular agitators of that period. Ryazanov as a representative of the trade unions, Muranov as an old worker Bolshevik who had carried himself courageously during the trials of the deputies of the State Duma, Stutska as head of the Lettish organization, Krylenko and Skilyansky as representatives of the army, Antonov Ovsinko as leader of the Petrograd battles. The absence of Sverdlov's name is obviously explained by the fact that he himself drew up the list, and in the confusion, nobody corrected it. It is characteristic of the party morals of that time that the whole headquarters of the opponents of the insurrection turned up in the Presidium. Zinoviev, Kamenev, Nogin, Rykov, Lunacharsky, Ryazanov. Of the left social revolutionaries, only the little fragile and courageous Spiridonova, who had served long years at hard labor for assassinating the subduer of the Tombosk peasants, enjoyed an all-Russian renown. The left social revolutionaries had no other name. The rights, on the other hand, had now little or nothing but names left. Very interesting that, they're starting to organize the new government and essentially putting in the leftist socialists from the left social revolutionaries and the Bolsheviks in power. And these people were formerly in jail. These people were formerly in exile. These people were formerly enemies of the state. And now here they are about to exercise state power on the largest country on earth. Quite inspiring for us today. We should always keep this in mind. Anything is possible. Continuing. The Congress greeted its Presidium with enthusiasm. While the factions had been assembling and conferring, Lenin, with his makeup still on, in wig and big spectacles, was sitting in the passageway in the company of 2 or 3 Bolsheviks. I told you Lenin was trans. I told you he was a black, gay, trans, communist woman. I'm telling you, man. He was sitting there with makeup and a wig on and big spectacles. Lenin over there looking like Lunel. Lenin over there looking like Aretha Franklin. Oh my God. I swear to God, I wish I could make Trotsky's book into a play like Hamilton, and I'm gonna get Law Roach. I'm gonna get Law Roach to play Lenin. just to trigger the right even more. Maybe even some leftists too. Let's find out who's really a homophobe and transphobe. Anyway, continuing here. On the way to a meeting of their faction, Dan and Skobelev stopped still, opposite the table where the conspirators were sitting, stared at Lenin, and obviously recognized him. They clocked Lenin. They clocked Lenin right there. Time then to take the makeup off, but Lenin was in no hurry to appear publicly. He preferred to look round a little and gather the threads into his hands while remaining behind the scenes. Oh, he was a fashion designer. In his Recollections of Lenin, published in 1924, Trotsky writes, the first session of the Second Congress of Soviets was sitting in Smolny. Lenin did not appear here. He remained in one of the rooms of Smolny in which, as I remember, there was for some reason no furniture, or almost none. Later, somebody spread blankets on the floor and put 2 cushions on them. Vladimir Lenin and I took a rest there, lying side by side. Just in a few minutes, I called, Dan is talking and you must answer him. Returned after my reply, I again lay down beside Vladimir Lenin, who of course had no thought of going to sleep. What the? Pause, no diddy. Whoa, flag on the play. Here I am, using pause and no homo. And before I was just talking about being homophobic. But what is this story? Trotsky, why are you including this story? Me and Lenin, we took a nap together on the floor. Like, what? My guy, what? What's the point of this? What? Okay. Anyway, returned after my reply, I again lay down beside Vladimir Lenin, who of course had no thought of going to sleep. Was that indeed possible? Every 5 or 10 minutes, somebody would run in from the assembly hall to tell us what was going on. Okay, very funny. Very funny. So apparently Trotsky and Lenin took a nap together on a blanket in Smolny right after the October Revolution. Just the weird stories. This is why we read the books, man. It's funny, man. Okay. Quick water break. All right. The president's chair is occupied by Kamenev, one of those phlegmatic types designed by nature herself for the office of chairman. There are 3 questions, he announces, on the order of the day: organization of a government, war and peace, convocation of the Constituent Assembly. An unusual, dull, alarming rumble breaks into the noise of the meeting from outside. This is the Peter and Paul Fortress ratifying the order of the day with artillery fire. A high tension current runs through the Congress, which now suddenly feels and realizes what it really is: the convention of a civil war. Lazovsky and opponents of the insurrection demanded a report from the Petrograd Soviet, but the Military Revolutionary Committee was a little behindhand. Replying artillery testified that the report was not ready. The insurrection was in full swing. The Bolshevik leaders were continually withdrawing to the rooms of the Military Revolutionary Committee to receive communications or give orders. Echoes of the fighting would burst up through the assembly like tongues of flame. When votes were taken, hands would be raised among bristling bayonets. A blue-gray acrid tobacco smoke hid the beautiful white columns and chandeliers. The verbal battles of the 2 camps were extraordinarily impressive against a background of cannon shots. Martov demanded the floor. The moment when the balance is still oscillating is his moment. This inventive statesman of eternal waverings. With his hoarse, tubercular voice, Martov makes instant rejoinder to the metallic voice of the guns. We must put a stop to military action on both sides. The question of power is beginning to be decided by conspiratorial methods. All the revolutionary parties have been placed before a fait accompli. A civil war threatens us with an explosion of counter-revolution. A peaceful solution of the crisis can be obtained by creating a government which will be recognized by the whole democracy. A considerable portion of the Congress applauds. Sukhanov remarks ironically, evidently, many a Bolshevik, not having absorbed the spirit of the teachings of Lenin and Trotsky, would have been glad to take that course. The left social revolutionaries and a group of united internationalists support the proposal of peace negotiations. The right wing, and perhaps also the close associates of Martov, are confident that the Bolsheviks will reject this proposal. They are wrong. The Bolsheviks send Lunacharsky to the tribune, the most peace-loving, the most velvety of their orators. The Bolshevik faction, he says, has absolutely nothing against Martov's proposal. The enemy are astonished. Lenin and Trotsky, and thus giving way a little to their own masses, comments Sukhanov, are at the same time cutting the ground from under the right wing. Martov's proposal is adopted unanimously. If the Mensheviks and social revolutionaries withdraw now, runs the comment in Martov's group, they will bury themselves. It is possible to hope, therefore, that the Congress will take the correct road of creating a united democratic front. Vain hope. A revolution never moves on diagonals. Very interesting what Trotsky just laid out right there. So if you don't remember, Martov is a Menshevik, and Mensheviks were socialists in name only. Yes, they were left-wing, but they were more reformist, compromisist. They didn't want to essentially overthrow the bourgeois regime. In fact, they were literal Marxist in the sense that they believed a bourgeois revolution had to take place to create the base form of capitalism that the proletarian will then overthrow to then start building socialism, eventually to communism. This is the separation between the, Leninist trend of socialist thinking in the sense that we don't need a bourgeois revolution to actually, get to the point where we can start building socialism. So Martov is up here, and because he is a Marxist, he actually is too caught up in theory. He's too caught up in the words of Marx and Engels, and believes that what is happening now is not the time. This is not the way it's supposed to go down. Bullets whizzing past my head, bombs dropping outside, warships being pointed at the Capitol. This isn't the way a revolution should go. And so he's pleading for peace. And the Bolsheviks actually give them peace. The Bolsheviks actually agree with Martov, the Menshevik, and say, yes, we want peace. But then that's when the right wing starts to come in. And we'll talk about this continuing in the book. Nelson says, let's go, final chapter. It's been a long journey. I would like to ask you, Nelson, have you learned anything from reading this book with us on this journey? Or has your opinion changed based on what we have read in this book? It's been a long journey. I have gained a lot of insider knowledge from reading this text. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading more of what people have to say. So Patrick Allen says, are you anti-white? I'm anti-white supremacy. And I do believe whiteness as a construct needs to be destroyed. But people being white, there's no such thing as a white person. We can tell because white people can't even agree on who is white. So whiteness is not real. I hate white supremacy and whiteness as a construct because it was only created as a means to divide people in hierarchies. And it was capitalists and slave owners who created this term. Before the advent of the transatlantic slave trade, there was no such thing as global whiteness, transnational whiteness. That is problematic, and that is what needs to be defeated as well. Okay? Nelson says, sad separation of brothers, but Marx did say capitalism would precede communism, but it's not like it's a Bible. Sad stuff. I don't get what's sad about it. I don't get what's sad. Though I do believe, Nelson, you would be like Martov in 1917. If Nelson, you were around in 1917, you would be a social revolutionary. You would be a Menshevik. You would be hanging on Kerensky's pant leg. Because I believe, there's a lot of framing that you have in your mind that makes it impossible to actually advocate for true revolution. What we want to do is advocate for revolution. We want a total end to this world as we know it, to create a new one. And I believe you don't want an end to this world. And I believe that's one of our fundamental perspective differences, ideological differences. You'd be okay with this world continuing as it is. I want this entire world to burn as it is so that we can build anew from the ashes. But I digress. Continuing here, Trotsky says, the right wing immediately violates the just approved initiation of peace negotiations. The Menshevik Kharash, a delegate from the 12th Army with a captain's star on his shoulders, makes a statement. These political hypocrites propose that we decide the question of power. Meanwhile, it is being decided behind our backs. Those blows at the Winter Palace are driving nails in the coffin of the party which has undertaken such an adventure. The captain's challenge is answered by the Congress with a grumble of indignation. Lieutenant Kuchin, who had spoken at the state conference in Moscow in the name of the front, tries here also to wield the authority of the army organizations. This Congress is untimely and even unauthorized. In whose name do you speak? Shout the tattered trenchcoats, their credentials written all over them in the mud of the trenches. Kuchin carefully enumerates 11 armies, but here this deceives nobody. At the front as at the rear, the generals of compromise are without soldiers. The group from the front continues the Menshevik lieutenant, declines to assume any responsibility for the consequences of this adventure. That means a complete break with the revolution. Henceforth, the arena of struggle is transferred to the localities. That means fusion with the counter-revolution against the Soviets. And so the confusion, the front's group, withdraws from this Congress. So essentially the right-wingers, there's right-wingers that come up to the podium here after the Bolsheviks agreed to peace. And they say we cannot be in unison. We cannot be in Congress with, these radical communists. And so even though the Bolsheviks, once again, are suing for peace, the right wing would rather create problems, always. All right. Nelson says, I have more respect towards Trotsky's rhetoric and visionary ability, also revolutionary logistics. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I had never really read full-on Trotsky before reading this book, and I did gain a lot of respect for him. He was an incredible mind. An incredible mind. Nelson says, not at all. I would love a whole new world. It's already very near. Not the one I want, though. What do you think is the world that is upcoming then? What does that new world look like that's right around the corner that you don't like? So continuing here, Trotsky says, one after another, the representatives of the right mount the tribune. They have lost the parishes and churches, but they still hold the belfries, and they hasten for the last time to pound the cracking bells. These socialists and Democrats, having made a compromise by hook and crook with the imperialist bourgeoisie, today flatly refuse to compromise with the people in revolt. The political calculations are laid bare. The Bolsheviks will collapse in a few days. They are thinking we must separate ourselves from them as quickly as possible, even help to overthrow them, and thus, to the best of our ability, ensure ourselves and our future. In the name of the right Menshevik faction, Kinachuk, a former president of the Moscow Soviet and a future Soviet ambassador in Berlin, reads a declaration. The military conspiracy of the Bolsheviks will plunge the country into civil dissension, demolish the Constituent Assembly, threaten us with a military catastrophe, and lead to the triumph of the counter-revolution. The sole way out, open negotiations with the provisional government for the formation of a power resting on all layers of the democracy. Having learned nothing, these people propose to the Congress to cross off the insurrection and return to Kerensky. Through the uproar, bellowing, and even hissing, the words of the representatives of the right social revolutionaries are hardly distinguishable. The declaration of his party announces the impossibility of work in collaboration with the Bolsheviks and declares the very Congress of Soviets, although convoked and opened by the Compromise's Central Executive Committee, to be without authority. Very interesting here that these people who are saying that we can't be in Congress with the Bolsheviks are the same ones who are purporting to be democratic. They were the ones purporting to be protecting this new republic after they overthrew the Tsar. They claim that they're standing up for the rights of the people in the revolution. And yet, when some communists enter the room, now they try to exit the room. And this is for all the people out there that say that when we establish a socialist state, we seize the state, smash it, and create the People's Republic instead, that we should allow these people to have parties. No. No, no. In the words of Kendrick Lamar, no, nigga, no, no. This is something that really fucking bothers me because these fucking liberals who claim to say that they, advocate for democracy have no democracy in mind when it comes to doing business with socialists or communists at all. That's when they start changing the rules. That's when they start saying that, Congress has less power or these seats are taken, et cetera, et cetera. Very bothersome. So, yeah, we don't need multi-party states with bourgeois bullshitters, okay? All right. So Nelson says an extremely far more unequal world, more fragmented societies are coming. That might be true, but that is a product of what? What is causing that, Nelson? You know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm going to say. It's white supremacy and capitalism, racist, racial capitalism, however you want to frame it, but it is that. And so we have to do everything in our power to destroy white supremacist racial capitalism. So with that in mind, what do you think is causing that? What do you think, Nelson? Anyway, continuing here, Trotsky says, this demonstration of the right wing does not cow anybody, but causes alarm and irritation. The majority of the delegates are too sick and tired of these bragging and narrow-minded leaders who fed them first with phrases and then with measures of repression. Can it be that the Dans, Kitachuks, and Kuchins still expect to instruct and command us? A lettish soldier, Peterson, with the tubercular flush on his cheeks and burning hatred in his eyes, denounces Karash and Kuchin as imposters. The revolution has had enough gab. We want action. The power should be in our hands. Let the imposters leave the Congress. The army is through with them. This voice, tense with passion, relieves the mind of the Congress, which has received nothing so far but insults. Other frontline soldiers rush to the support of Peterson. These Kuchins represent the opinions of little gangs who have been sitting in the army committees since April. The army long ago demanded new elections. Those who live in the trenches are impatiently awaiting the transfer of power to the Soviets. So essentially, the right-wingers were saying that, we're going to call our buddies at the front line and they're going to come back here to Petrograd and Moscow and they're going to crush the Bolsheviks. And so the soldiers stand up and say, no, we pretty much like the Bolsheviks and we're going to call our homies at the front and they're going to come and kill you. So what you trying to do? So very interesting what happened here. Continuing, Trotsky says, but the rights still hold the belfries. A representative of the Bund declares that all has been happened. So all that has happened in Petrograd is a misfortune and invites the delegates to join the members of the Duma who have decided to march unarmed to the Winter Palace in order to die with the government. Gibes were to be heard in the general uproar, or jibes were to be heard in the general uproar, writes Sukhanov. Some coarse and some poisonous. The unctuous orator has obviously mistaken his audience. Enough from you, deserters, shout the delegates. Guest red guards and sentries at the door to the withdrawing delegates. Join Kornilov, enemies of the people. Damn, so the right-wingers are standing up and they're getting their ass booed down by their own soldiers. The soldiers are calling them enemies of the people and that they're trash. Okay? So, continuing here. We have to send some people out of here. Okay? Once again, trollish comments will get you kicked out. Nelson says, I agree, but how are we going to fight exactly? Protest, shooting guns, no hermit money. Nelson, how are we going to do that? Mass worker action and a vanguard party. Mobilizing the workers and forming a vanguard party. It's very simple, man. It's very simple. If you're at this point where we've been reading books, dealing with these topics for so long and you're still confused, then I have failed as a teacher. I'm not going to go off on you. I have failed as a teacher. The only solution to our problem is mobilizing workers, raising class consciousness, and organizing a revolutionary vanguard party. That is the only way. That's the only way. But if you're still thinking, what are we going to do? I have failed. I'm sorry to you, Nelson. I am deeply sorry. I'm deeply sorry. I'm deeply sorry that you have learned nothing in my class. I'm sorry. Anyway, the withdrawal of the rights did not leave any vacant space. Evidently, the rank-and-file delegates had refused to join the officers and Junkers for a struggle against the workers and soldiers. Only about 70 delegates, that is, a little more than half of the right-wing faction, went out. The waverers took their place with the intermediate groups who had decided not to leave the Congress. Whereas before the opening of the Congress, the social revolutionaries of all tendencies had numbered not over 190 men. During the next few hours, the number of left social revolutionaries alone rose to 180. They were joined by all those who had not yet decided to join the Bolsheviks, although ready to support them. The Mensheviks and social revolutionaries were quite ready to remain in a provisional government of some sort, of a pre-parliament under any circumstances. Can one, after all, break with cultured society? But the Soviets, that is only the people. The Soviets are all right, while you can use them to get a compromise with the bourgeoisie. But can one possibly think of tolerating Soviets which have suddenly imagined themselves masters of the country? The Bolsheviks were left alone, wrote the social revolutionary Zenizivov. Subsequently, and from that moment, they began to rely only upon crude physical force. Moral principle undoubtedly slammed the door, along with Dan and Gotz. Moral principle will march in a procession of 300 men with 2 lanterns to the Winter Palace, only to run into the crude physical force of the Bolsheviks and back down. Very interesting. The motion adopted by the Congress in favor of peace negotiations was left hanging in the air. If the rights had admitted the possibility of compromising with the victorious proletariat, they would have been in no hurry to break with the Congress. Martov could not have failed to understand this. Nevertheless, he clung to the idea of a compromise, the thing upon which his whole policy always stands or fails. We must put a stop to the bloodshed, he begins again. Those are only rumors. Voices call out. It is not only rumors that we hear, he answers. If you come to the windows, you will hear cannon shots. This is undeniable. When the Congress quiets down, shots are audible without going to the windows. Martov's declaration, hostile through and through to the Bolsheviks and lifeless in its arguments, condemns the revolution as accomplished by the Bolshevik Party alone by the method of a purely military plot, and demands that the Congress suspend its labors until an agreement has been reached with all the socialist parties. To try to find the resultant of a parallelogram of forces in a revolution is worse than trying to catch your own shadow. Very interesting. So Martov, the Menshevik Marxist, is telling the Bolsheviks, guys, you gotta stop winning. You gotta stop winning so fucking hard because we gotta make peace with the losers. See, this is once again, in every chapter, Trotsky talks about the minutia of insurrection and revolution. And one of the things that we hold true as Marxists is that we exist in a dialectic. One force meets its counterforce, and then one sublimates the other, and something new is born. And constantly, there are these countervailing forces that appear in Trotsky's story of retelling the October Revolution. And Martov, the character, should be the one celebrating the most that the revolution has been successful, that the proletariat are about to establish their dictatorship, that the bourgeoisie are about to be officially crushed. And yet and still, he's saying, guys, we gotta make peace. See, this is the thing, man. We also hold to be true that people act in their material self-interest most of the time, if not all the time, in all ways that that make sense or that can be understood. We need to clarify that, but I won't. I'll just say that all people act in their material self-interest. Okay, let's just leave it at that. And Martov is most definitely acting in his own self-interest, because the only way he's probably been able to feed himself, clothe himself, and wear nice suits is by, essentially being the bridge between the radical left and the moderate bourgeoisie, right? That's essentially probably how he made his bread and butter. All right, continuing here. Nelson says, if it's that simple, why hasn't it happened despite growing open corruption and inequality? Well, it has happened, Nelson. The struggle for socialism has been going on for a long-ass time, especially in your country, in Spain, all throughout Europe. People have continuously tried to raise workers' consciousness, organize workers, put on strikes and protest as well, and continue to try to modify, the propaganda to raise class consciousness for the working class still to this day. If it's that simple, nobody said it was simple. I didn't say it was simple, and I did not say it was easy. In fact, the struggle that we are in is one of the most difficult struggles one could ever enter into. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I'm saying that is what must be done, because that's what has been proven to be successful. From Cuba to Vietnam to Russia, et cetera, okay? All right, we have to set some people out of here, because some people are not dealing with the actual text. Some people are just coming here with copy pasta. Okay, let's continue here. Martov's declaration, hostile through and through to the Bolsheviks and lifeless in his arguments, condemns the revolution as accomplished by the Bolshevik Party alone by the method of a purely military plot, and demands that the Congress suspend its labors until an agreement has been reached with all the socialist parties. To try to find the resultant of a parallelogram of forces in a revolution is worse than trying to catch your own shadow. At that moment, there appeared in the Congress the Bolshevik faction of the City Duma, those who had refused to seek a problematic death under the walls of the Winter Palace. They were led by Hofe, subsequently the first Soviet ambassador to Berlin. All right. Continuing here. Sorry. At that moment, there appeared in the Congress the Bolshevik faction of the City Duma, those who had refused to seek a problematic death under the walls of the Winter Palace. They were led by Yofe, subsequently the first Soviet ambassador at Berlin. The Congress again crowded up, giving its friends a joyful welcome. But it was necessary to put up a resistance to Martov. This task fell to Trotsky. Now, since the exodus of the rights, concedes Sukhanov. His position is as strong as Martov's is weak. The opponents stand side by side in the tribune, hemmed in on all sides by a solid ring of excited delegates. What has taken place, says Trotsky, is an insurrection, not a conspiracy. An insurrection of the popular masses needs no justification. We have tempered and hardened the revolutionary energy of the Petrograd workers and soldiers. We have openly forged the will of the masses to insurrection and not conspiracy. Our insurrection has conquered, and now you propose to us, renounce your victory, make a compromise. With whom, I ask? With whom ought we make a compromise? With that pitiful handful who just went out? Haven't we seen them through and through? There is no longer anybody in Russia who is for them. Are the millions of workers and peasants represented in this Congress, whom they are ready now, as always, to turn over for a price to the mercies of the bourgeoisie? Are they to enter a compromise with these men? No, a compromise is no good here. To those who have gone out and to all who made like proposals. To those who have gone out and to all who made like proposals, we must say, you are pitiful, isolated individuals. You are bankrupts. Your role is played out. Go where you belong from now on, into the rubbish can of history. So what Trotsky is saying essentially to the right-wingers who just exited the room and to Martov, who is telling them, well, you need to make peace with the socialists. You need to make peace with the right-wingers who are not going to be a part of the Congress. Trotsky immediately says, fuck them. Let them hit the door. Let them hit the road, Jack, and don't come back. You get what I'm saying? And yeah, he's saying that this is what power is like. This is what it means to exercise power. You know what people say all the time? Why aren't you a vegan? Because if you were an animal, a cow would eat you. If the roles were reversed, the chicken would eat you. This is how it is. This is actual power. This is actual politics. You have to crush your enemies completely. I forgot what number in the 48 laws of power that is, but the only way to be successful is to crush your enemies completely. And that is why the Bolsheviks were successful. They completely crushed their enemies. The same way bourgeois revolutions happen, and they completely crushed their enemies. July 4th was last year. They didn't say, okay, let's compromise with the royalists. You know what I mean? Not last year. The July 4th was last week. July 4th was last week, and nobody said, let's compromise with the royalists. No, they said, let's kill all the Reds and chase them out the country. Continuing here. Then we will go, cries Martov, without awaiting the votes of the Congress. Martov, in anger and affectation, regrets Sukhanov, began to make his way from the tribune toward the door. And I began to gather together my faction for a conference in the form of an emergency session. It was not wholly a matter of affectation. The Hamlet of democratic socialism, Martov, would make a step forward when the revolution fell back as in July. But now, when the revolution was ready for a tiger's leap, Martov would fall back. The withdrawal of the rights had deprived him of the possibility of parliamentary maneuvering, and that put him instantly out of his element. He hastened to abandon the Congress and break with the insurrection. Sukhanov replied as best he could. The faction split in half. Martov won by 14 votes against 12. All right. Let's send some more people out of here. Okay. All right. Trotsky introduced a resolution. Trotsky introduced a resolution, an active indictment against the compromisers. They prepared the ruinous offensive of June 18th. They supported the government of treason to the people. They screened the deception of the peasants on the land question. They carried out the disarming of the workers. They were responsible for the purposeless dragging out of the war. They permitted the bourgeoisie to deepen the economic ruin of the country. Having lost the confidence of the masses, they resisted the calling of a Congress of Soviets. And finally, finding themselves in a minority, they broke with the Soviets. Here again, the order of the day is suspended for a declaration. Really, the patience of the Bolshevik Presidium has no bounds. The president of the executive committee of the Peasant Soviet has come to summon the peasants to abandon this untimely Congress and go to the Winter Palace to die with those who were sent there to do our will. This summons to die in the ruins of the Winter Palace is getting pretty tiresome in its monotony. A sailor just arrived from the Aurora ironically announces that there are no ruins since they are only firing blanks from the cruiser. Proceed with your business in peace, he says. The soul of the Congress finds rest in the admirable black-bearded sailor, incarnating the simple and imperious will of the insurrection. Martov, with his mosaic of thoughts and feelings, belongs to another world. That is why he breaks with the Congress. So once again, when the people are gaining power, when the working class and the peasants are gaining power, now we see that the bourgeois elements, the real champagne socialists, the Marxists in name only and socialists in name only, they're all now running out the building when they see the actual workers. And I love how Trotsky vividly describes the people that we are describing, because it almost reminds me of how Jesus said the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And when you really think about that, the first people to go to heaven will be the people that don't look like, they belong anywhere in polite society. People with torn and ripped clothes, people that are overweight, people with missing teeth, people with bad skin, all sorts of things. You know what I'm saying? That we would ascribe to being, less worthy of attention, life, grace, happiness. And I'm not trying to, go down the Christian Marxist route, because I'm not a Christian at all. But I'm just saying, it's very interesting how he opened up the chapter by saying the people were wearing, unoiled shoes. People had leathery faces, eyes that were, glazed because they had seen so much tragedy, because these were soldiers who had just come from the front line, workers who had been, abused, and peasants as well. And very interesting how now when the Congress is filled essentially with the wretched of the earth, now the bourgeoisie are leaving the Congress here. It's very interesting. Continuing. Still another special declaration, this time half friendly. The right social revolutionaries, says Kamkov, have gone out, but we, the lefts, have remained. The Congress welcomes those who have remained. However, even they consider it necessary to achieve a united revolutionary front and come out against Trotsky's sharp resolution, shutting the door against a compromise with the moderate democracy. Here, too, the Bolsheviks made a concession. Nobody ever saw them before, it seems, in such a yielding mood. No wonder they are the masters of the situation, and they have no need to insist upon the forms of words. Again, Lunacharsky takes the tribune. The weight of the task which has fallen upon us is not subject to any doubt, he says. A union of all the genuinely revolutionary elements of the democracy is necessary. But have we, the Bolsheviks, taken any steps whatever to repel the other groups? Did we not adopt Martov's proposal unanimously? For this, we have been answered with accusations and threats. Is it not obvious that those who have left the Congress are ceasing even their compromisist work and openly going over to the camp of the Kornilovists? And so Trotsky's making a little joke here. Isn't it funny? The top compromisers can't compromise with the Bolsheviks now that we're the majority. Anyway, the Bolsheviks did not insist upon an immediate vote on Trotsky's resolution. They did not want to hinder the attempts to reach an agreement on a Soviet basis. The method of teaching by object lesson can be successfully applied even to the accompaniment of artillery. As before with the adoption of Martov's proposal, so now the concession of Kamkov only revealed the impotence of these conciliatory labor pains. However, in distinction from the left Mensheviks, the left social revolutionaries did not quit the Congress. They were feeling too directly the pressure of the villages in revolt. A mutual feeling out has taken place. The primary positions have been occupied. There comes a pause in the evolution of the Congress. Shall we adopt the basic decrees and create a Soviet government? It is impossible. The old government is still sitting there in the semi-darkness of a chamber in the Winter Palace, the only lamp on the table carefully barricaded with newspapers. Shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning, the Presidium declares a half-hour recess. The Red Marshals employed the long delay accorded to them with complete success. A new wind was blowing in the atmosphere of the Congress when its sitting was renewed. Kamenev read from the Tribune a telephonogram just received from Antonev. The Winter Palace had been captured by the troops of the Revolutionary Military Committee. With the exception of Kerensky, the whole provisional government, with the dictator Kishkin at its head, is under arrest. Let's repeat that. The Winter Palace has been captured by the troops of the Revolutionary Military Committee. With the exception of Kerensky, the whole provisional government with the dictator Kishkin at its head is under arrest. Although everybody has already learned the news as it passed from mouth to mouth, this official communication crashed in heavier than a cannon salute. The leap over the abyss dividing the revolutionary class from power has been made. Driven out to the palace of Kishenskaya in July, the Bolsheviks have now entered the Winter Palace as rulers. There is no other power now in Russia but the power of the Soviets. A complex tangle of feelings breaks loose in applause and shouting, triumph, hope, but also anxiety. There come new and more confident bursts of applause. The deed is done. Even the most favorable correlation of forces contains concealed surprises. But the victory becomes indubitable when the enemy's staff is made prisoner. Very powerful here. I mean, think about this, man. These people are sitting in, this large conference room. I believe this is in Smolny, I believe. And they hear that finally the Bolsheviks have taken over the Winter Palace. The revolution is done. They really do have all the power here. And here they are, just shocked. Like, yo, we are actually doing it. You know what I'm saying? So Nelson says, I agree with your revolution method, but I also think we need radically more than that. Okay? What do we need more than that? What do we need more than raising people's class consciousness through, direct action and mass worker organizations and movements, and also a revolutionary vanguard party to advocate for the transition of power from bourgeois dictatorship under capitalism to a proletarian dictatorship building socialism. What more do we need than that? What more do we need than great propaganda? What more do we need than just making people aware of the contradictions of this society as they continue to see their living conditions depreciate? What more? Nelson says, build forms of life that require the old system less each day. Build relationships that cannot be priced. Build communities that cannot be reduced to consumers. Build knowledge that cannot be monopoly. Okay, I get that, but these are just slogans. What does it mean to build? Are you going to build it by yourself, or are you going to build it in a group? Are you going to build it in, groups of people, or are you just going to build it by yourself? These are just slogans. I no longer think the state and the market are the primary actors. I think they're expressions of deeper informational processes emergent and within us. Yeah, I disagree with that. You know what I mean? There's been a deep desire in man for some higher purpose, but yet and still we are trapped to these physical forms where we have to eat shit and piss. Okay, so we're still trapped in these forms. And what else is more than that? Anyway, I will continue here. Kamenev impressively reads the list of those arrested. The better-known names bring hostile or ironic exclamations from the Congress. Especially bitter is the greeting of Tereshchenko, who has guided the foreign destinies of Russia. And Kerensky, it has become known that at 10 o'clock this morning, he was orating without great success to the garrison of Gatchina. When he went from there is not exactly known. Rumor says to the front. The fellow travelers of the revolution feel bad. They foresee that now the stride of the Bolsheviks will become more firm. Somebody from the left social revolutionaries objects to the arrest of the socialist ministers. A representative of the United Internationalists offers a warning, lest the Minister of Agriculture, Maslov, turns up in the same cell in which he sat under the monarchy. He is answered by Trotsky, who was imprisoned during the ministry of Maslov in the same Kresty as under Nicholas. Political arrest is not a matter of vengeance. It is dictated by considerations of expediency. The government should be indicted and tried, first of all, for its indubitable connection with Kornilov. The socialist ministers will be placed only under house arrest. It would have been simpler and more accurate to say that the seizure of the old government was dictated by the demands of the still unfinished struggle. It was a question of the political beheading of the hostile camp and not of punishment for past sins. Very interesting. Trotsky is saying here that, yes, we have to arrest our political enemies after we have a successful insurrection, because that's just the way to make sure that the insurrection, which is supposed to represent the revolution and the will of the people or the masses of people. That's the only way to make sure that it will be concretely made, that it can be enforced, that it will now, stand firm. So yeah, very interesting. And it's not a type of vengeance. Arresting your political enemies is not a type of vengeance. It's just the nature of things. That's the way it has to go. Okay, continuing here. But this parliamentary query as to the arrest was immediately crowded out by another infinitely more important episode. The 3rd Bicycle Battalion. Oh God, the Bicycle Battalion boys are back. The 3rd Bicycle Battalion, sent by Kerensky against Petrograd, has come over to the side of the revolutionary people. This, too, favorable news seemed unbelievable, but that was exactly what had happened. This selected military unit, the first to be chosen out from the whole active army, adhered to the insurrection before ever reaching the capital. If there had been a shade of restraint in its joy at the arrest of the ministers, the Congress was now seized with unalloyed and irrepressible rapture. The Bolshevik commissar of Sarko's Selo, together with a delegate from the Bicycle Battalion, ascended the tribune. They had both just arrived to make a report to the Congress. The garrison of Sarko's Selo is defending the approaches to Petrograd. The defensists withdrew from the Soviet. All the work rested upon us alone. Learning of the approach of the bicycle men, the Soviet of Sarko's Selo prepared to resist. But the alarm happily turned out to be false. Among the bicycle men are no enemies of the Congress of Soviets. Another battalion will soon arrive at Sarko, and friendly greeting is already in preparation there. The Congress drinks down this report in great gulps. Okay? The representative of the bicycle men is greeted with a storm, a whirlwind, a cyclone. This 3rd Battalion, he reports, was suddenly sent from the southwestern front to the north under telegraphic orders for the defense of Petrograd. The bicycle men advanced with eyes blindfolded, only confusedly guessing what was up. At Peredolsk, they ran into an echelon of the 5th Bicycle Battalion, also moving on the capital. At a joint meeting held right there at the station, it became clear that among all the bicyclists, there is not one man to be found who would consent to take action against his brothers. It was jointly decided not to submit to the government. I tell you concretely, says the bicycle soldier, we will not give the power to a government at the head of which stand the bourgeoisie and the landlords. That word concretely, introduced by the revolution into the everyday language of the people, sounded fine at this meeting. This is very impactful because if you've been following along in this book, the Bicycle Battalion has been one of the reoccurring characters in the book. We had a great laugh about it in chapter 1 or 2 when we first read this term, Bicycle Battalion. And essentially they were some of the most right-wing guys. They were the ones who defended the bourgeoisie because a lot of the guys in the Bicycle Battalion were like of the middle classes. And so them coming over to the Soviets and the Bolsheviks is a very positive thing for the revolution. Okay, go in here. Nelson says, I would retort still in terms of ownership, as if ownership were the root. It is only one surface expression of a deeper pattern, consent, habit, fear, and the story that no other life is possible. Take the factory and the factory returns, change the human relation to the system, and the system loses the ground that made it natural. That's behind my slogans. I get what you're saying, Nelson. I just want to know, when you say build, when you say build forms of life that require the old system, these sounds like the type of slogans like, recently there was this couple who recently climbed the Empire State Building, and they risked their lives to announce their marriage or engagement, whatever, and they unfurl this black flag written on it saying something like, when the power of love conquers power, that's when we have world peace. Love conquers power, and that is the ultimate power, and that will bring world peace. Something, like some random bullshit like that. Or like when Michael Jackson said, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. Okay, I'm asking him to make a change. Okay, I made the change to be Hitler, and you made the change to be Gandhi. That's not what we can't just individualize our struggle, is what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is when you say the slogans, and then you talk about a factory and the factory returns, change the human relation to the system. How How? I'm saying that we do this specifically through mass worker organizations and a unified vanguard party with radical demands to overthrow the system, to seize the state and smash it. Okay? I know you're not a slogan politician, but what do you mean? You didn't say how. I understand that you have a different conception of what materialism means. You're saying that our actions, ideals, thoughts, beliefs are dictated starting with our ownership of how we reproduce ourselves, or our relation to how we reproduce ourselves. But there are other expressions that dictate our material reality. That's your opinion. That's your opinion. I would say that the other expressions are just also derived from our material reality as well. Someone is racist, someone is sexist most of the time because that was the culture that they were brought up in, but that culture is derived from a relationship to how we reproduce ourselves and how we survive, that then becomes an expression of something else. You know what I'm saying? They created the idea that black people were naturally inferior because they had to justify putting us in fields and working us to death. Okay? They had to justify that we're stronger and better athletes and all these other things, that we got big old dicks that hang to our knees, because they had to justify breeding us like animals. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, all the other stuff, consent, fear, habit, to me, these are just more outgrowths of our material relations. But when you talk about, you're not a slogan politician, I would say how? Because all you're saying is take the factory and the factory returns. What does that mean? Who takes the factory? Once again, are you saying that these are individual things we need to do, or are things that we need to do in a mass movement, in a collectivized way? What are you saying? That's what I'm saying. Okay? All right, continuing here. How many hours was it since they were threatening the Congress from the same tribune with punishment from the front? Now the front itself had spoken its concrete word. Suppose the army committees do sabotage the Congress. Suppose the rank and file soldier mass only succeeds in getting its delegates there, rather as an exception. Suppose in many regiments and divisions, they have not yet learned to distinguish a Bolshevik from a social revolutionary. Never mind, the voice from Peredolsk is the authentic, unmistakable, irrefutable voice of the army. From this verdict, there is no appeal. The Bolsheviks, and they only, had understood in time that the soldier cook of the bicycle battalion infinitely better represented the front than all the Karashes and Kuchins, with their wilted credentials. A portentous change occurred here in the mood of the delegates. They began to feel, writes Sukhanov, that things were going to go smoothly and well, that the horrors promised on the right would not, after all, be so terrible, and that the leaders might be correct in everything else too. The unhappy Mensheviks selected this moment to draw attention to themselves. They had not yet, it seems, withdrawn. They had been considering in their faction what to do. Out of a desire to bring after him the wavering groups, Kapelinski, who had been appointed to inform the Congress of the decision adopted, finally spoke aloud the most candid reason for breaking with the Bolsheviks. Remember that the troops are riding toward Petrograd. We are threatened with catastrophe. What? Are you still here? The question was shouted from all corners of the hall. Why, you went out once. The Mensheviks moved in a tiny group toward the entrance, accompanied by scornful farewells. We went out, grieved Sukhanov, completely untying the hands of the Bolsheviks, turning over to them the whole arena of the population. It would have made little difference if they had stayed. In any case, they went to the bottom. The waves of events closed ruthlessly over their heads. It was time for the Congress to address a manifesto to the people, but the session continued to consist only of special declarations. Events simply refused to fit into the order of the day. At 5:17 in the morning, Krylenko, staggering tired, made his way to the tribune with a telegram in his head. The 12th Army sends greetings to the Congress and informs it of the creation of a military revolutionary committee, which has undertaken to stand guard in the Northern Front. Attempts to the government to get armed help have broken against the resistance of the army. The commander-in-chief of the Northern Front, General Cheremissov, has submitted to the committee. The commissar of the provisional government, Voitinsky, has resigned and awaits a substitute. Delegations from the echelons moved against Petrograd have one after another announced to the Military Revolutionary Committee their solidarity with the Petrograd garrison. Pandemonium, says Reed. men weeping, embracing each other. So yeah, the soldiers at the front who were supposed to come back to Petrograd and supposedly kill all the dirty communists who are seizing the government essentially said, we're on the side of the dirty communists. And so now in the halls of Smolny, of the Bolshevik capital, right? The Bolshevik, de facto headquarters. The people are crying. People are crying, holding each other. Think about that, man. This is like the end to a great movie, like a very, very long 3-part epic, like Lord of the Rings, man. And, at the end, they fucking defeat Sauron or whatever. I never saw Lord of the Rings. I just read the book, but you know what I'm saying? It's like an incredibly epic story over these past 8 or 9 months or so. So Nelson says, I can go on how, but I want to help keep the stream focused on your reading. Nelson, you have not made any comment in relation to the actual parts of the text. I'm letting you slide because you're talking about broad generalities and I like you. So I'm just letting you just go. I'm just letting you go. When he said, I can go on to how, but I want to keep it on the topic of the stream. Brad, just say it how. Say it how. Nelson says, I'm tempted, but for another time. I repeat, I'm no slogan politician. I don't even believe in hope. Okay, you have to have hope. You have to have revolutionary hope. We have to have some type of, idea that a better world is possible. Because we can't continue to live in a world of, I refuse to live in a world with anti-black racism, with white supremacy, with explicit neo-colonialist adventures in Africa. You know what I'm saying? I've refused to not do anything to try to change that world. You get what I'm saying? So, no, we have to do something. We have to do something. Anyway, continuing here. Luna Trotsky at last got a chance to read a proclamation addressed to the workers, soldiers, and peasants. But this was not merely a proclamation. By its mere exposition of what had happened and what was proposed, this hastily written document laid down the foundations of a new state structure. The authority of the compromised Central Executive Committee is at an end. The provisional government is deposed. The Congress assumes the power. The Soviet government proposes immediate peace. It will transfer the land to the peasants, democratize the army, establish control over production, promptly summon the Constituent Assembly, guarantee the rights of the nations of Russia to self-determination. The Congress resolves that all power in the localities goes over to the Soviets. Every phrase as it is read turns into a salvo of applause. Soldiers, be on your guard. Railway workers, stop all echelons sent by Kerensky against Petrograd. The fate of the revolution and the fate of the democratic peace is in your hands. Hearing the land mentioned, the peasants pricked up their ears. According to its constitution, the Congress represented only Soviets of workers and soldiers, but there were delegates present from individual peasant Soviets. They now demanded that they be mentioned in the document. They were immediately given a right to vote. The representative of the Petrograd Peasant Soviet signed the proclamation with bond hands in both, the representative of the Petrograd Peasant Soviet signed the proclamation with both hands and both feet. A member of Avkentiev's executive committee, Berezin, silent until now, stated that out of 68 peasant Soviets replying to a telegraphic questionnaire, one half had expressed themselves for a Soviet government, the other half for the transfer of power to the Constituent Assembly. If this was the mood of the provincial Soviets, half composed of governmental functionaries, could there be any doubt that a future peasant Congress would support the Soviet power? Interesting. So just like in our timeline, rural people tend to be more conservative because, the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, they're seizing power. And so they're just asking all their connections throughout the country, all the, established Soviets out there in the world, in Russia. Do you support the idea of you actually having the power? And some of them are still captured by bourgeois thinking. And so half of them say, yeah, we want Soviet power. The other half are saying, let rich people continue to rule us and fuck us, essentially. So yeah, something that still had to be overcome. And this will become important in the chapter later. Okay. But once again, very, very impactful for me. It's very impactful for me reading this book, how important it is to have soldiers become communists. It's important to have soldiers become radicalized. It's important to have socialist soldiers, You know what I mean? To make a successful revolution and insurrection. All right. All right. Let's go here. All right. Freeton Hitch says, why do you seek to recreate the failed communist state? Did I say that? Did I say that? Fritz and Hitch, I will answer your question if I said that. Other than that, your comment will be ignored. Did I say I want to recreate any state? No, I did not. Nelson says, CIA might be watching this. I can't reveal how. I will be risking sabotage. Okay, that's bullshit because I have never told anybody on this channel to do anything illegal. We are totally against adventurism on this channel. And one of the reasons some people are scared or worried about getting involved in left-wing activism or advocation is because they think somehow that their radical ideas are so damn dangerous, which they are, but they as a people are not. Because y'all niggas ain't killers. Y'all niggas ain't gangster, okay? Nobody's watching and tapping your phones just because you read The State and Revolution, okay? A lot of us communists and socialists got to get this shit out of our head that everybody else who actually understands what we understand, that yes, capitalism needs to be destroyed. Yes, we live under a bourgeois dictatorship and it needs to crumble and fall. Yes, those are dangerous ideas, but you are not dangerous. You are a pimply, 5'4", frail or fat white boy living in the middle of Midwest. You're living in the middle of the Midwest. You have a few socialist friends in your Discord channel, and all you do is talk back and forth about Fed jacketing each other and about the minutia of the differences of the thoughts of socialist leaders who died over 100 years ago. You niggas are not dangerous. You are pussy, okay? Real killers, real niggas who actually do real shit are the ones actually having their phone fucking tapped. You are not dangerous, okay? Okay, that's what a lot of y'all need to know. So I'm sick of this shit saying, oh, the CIA might be watching. The CIA ain't watching this shit. Okay, first and foremost, the bourgeois government feels like communism is not actually an actual threat. Yes, it is a threat to, some people right now in the Trump administration, but that's because they're all fucking boomers. And the only way they know how to communicate that they want to maintain the status quo of capitalism is by basically red baiting, okay? That's the only way they know how to communicate because they grew up hiding under desks and chairs because the Soviets were going to drop nuclear bombs on LA and New York City, right? Anyway, okay, we are not trying to hurt socialism. This is a person that's not actually interested in actual debate. Fritz and Hitch is going to the re-education camp. This is really ridiculous. Anyway, the CIA is not listening to this, and even if they are, which they are fucking not, listen, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm only asking you to get involved. I'm only asking you to get involved in a union. I'm asking you to join a leftist organization. I'm actually asking you to get outside and be involved in the politics of your country, the radical politics of your country, wherever you live, especially if you're in America, though. I'm not asking you to, pick up an AR. In fact, after reading this book about the Russian Revolution, the first thing we learned is that we don't need to be training in the woods with like those three-tooth rednecks in Wisconsin. You don't need to be doing that. Okay? There's nothing violent about what we are asking to do. We want a violent overthrow of the capitalist system, but we are not saying that we want to just behead people in the street and just dome people. Okay? I know I make those jokes sometime, but that's not what I'm asking you to do. I've never once advocated for violence on this channel. And if I have made jokes about it or made light about that, I'm sorry, okay? But my ideals, and I'm being wholly honest here, no sarcasm, no joking or anything like that. If what we are doing is so dangerous, then why do they still allow these organizations to exist, okay? And by actually getting involved in these organizations and then they start to clamp down on them, this will show the contradictions in a bourgeois society, in a liberal democracy. If they start shutting down your local communist party, your local socialist party, we'll realize very quickly that the freedom of speech and freedom of expression and all the things that the liberals say that they want to protect are not actually real. And this will only help our cause by exposing the contradictions within this society. So Nelson, I'm not asking you to shoot your fucking president. I'm not asking you to blow up a fucking building. I'm not telling anybody to do anything like that. I am only telling you I'm only telling you to get involved in a union, get involved in worker organizing, get involved in labor strikes, get involved with a leftist radical group in your community, city, country. That's all. That's all I'm asking you to do. Shout out to Judy Francis. She says, hey, I'm a boomer. Hate Donald Trump and all his works. What can I do from bed? Can't walk good anymore. What you can do, Judy, is you can support leftist groups by donating to one that you think is good. You know what I mean? $5 a month or $10 a month. Or, if you're using social media right now, you could be sharing articles from People's World or other leftist newspapers and websites as well. The leader of the Communist Party of the United States, Joe Sims, is a man in a wheelchair. He can't walk anymore either. And yet and still, we see him out on the picket line. We see him in the office every single day. We see him outside in the streets marching and protesting. Okay? So, yeah, it's very, very important here. I just went off on that little rant here because it's very important that you niggas are not Trotsky. You niggas are not Lenin. You niggas are not dangerous. So stop trying to say that everybody's a fucking fed because nobody gives a fuck about your pimply, loser-ass, fake-ass life, okay? Y'all niggas aren't gangster. You niggas ain't real, okay? I'm sorry for going off, but it's very, very important that we do this because I think, sometimes people think that out and loud communists are somehow types of bait or something like that. And trust me, there is nobody who hates the American government more than me. There is nobody who hates America more than me. Okay? All right. So I'm making that absolutely, absolutely fucking clear. Okay. Now Nelson is just over here trolling as well. Okay. Anyway, I'm sorry for ranting so long. All right. All right. While solidifying the rank and file delegates, the proclamation frightened and even repelled some of the fellow travelers by its irrevocableness. Small factions and remnants again followed through the tribune. From the third time, a group of Mensheviks, obviously the most leftward now, broke away from the Congress. They withdrew, it seems, only in order to be in a position to save the Bolsheviks. Otherwise, you will destroy yourselves and us and the revolution. The president of the Polish Socialist Party, Lapinski, although he remained at the Congress in order to defend his points of view to the end, gave essential adherence to the Declaration of Martov. The Bolsheviks will not be able to wield the power which they are assuming. The United Jewish Workers' Party abstained from the vote. Likewise, the United Internationalists. How much, though, did all these united amount to get all together? The proclamation was adopted almost unanimously, only 2 dissenting, with 12 abstaining. The delegates had hardly strength left to applaud. Very interesting. So for anybody, once again, who says that the Bolsheviks were somehow a Jewish conspiracy, tell me why the United Jewish Workers' Party abstained from advocating for the Bolshevik resolution adopted on October 25th. Why? Tell me why. Anyway, Judy Francis says, we donate and share articles, pray for change this November. Absolutely. Of course, you have to, when it comes to voting, it's very complicated. Just vote, I guess, just to do it. But the real substantial change that we need in this world, especially in America, won't just be done through liberal electoralism, I will say. Okay? But continuing here. The session finally came to an end at about 6 o'clock. A gray and cold autumn morning was dawning all over the city. The hot spots of the campfires were fading out in the gradually lightening streets. The graying faces of the soldiers and the workers with rifles were concentrated and unusual. If there were astrologers in Petrograd, they must have observed portentous signs in the heavens. The capital awoke under a new power. The everyday people, the functionaries, the intellectuals, cut off from arena of events, rushed for the papers early to find out to which shore the wave had tossed during the night. But it was not easy to make out what had happened. To be sure, the papers reported the seizure by conspirators of the Winter Palace and the ministers, but only as a passing episode. Kerensky has gone to headquarters. The fate of the government will be decided by the front. Reports of the Congress of Soviets reproduce only the declarations of the right wing, enumerate those who withdrew, and expose the impotence of those who remained. The political editorials written before the seizure of the Winter Palace exude a cloudless optimism. The rumors of the street do not wholly coincide with the tone of the newspapers. Whatever you say, the ministers are, after all, locked up in the fortress. Reinforcements from Kerensky are not yet in sight. Functionaries and officers confer anxiously. Journalists and lawyers ring each other up. Editors try to collect their thoughts. The drawing room oracles say, we must surround the usurpers with a blockade of universal contempt. Storekeepers don't know whether to do business or refrain. The new authorities give orders to do business. The restaurants open. The tram cars move. The banks languish with evil forebodings. The seismograph of the stock exchange describes a convulsive curve. Of course, the Bolsheviks will not hold out long, but they may do damage before they tumble. The reactionary French journalist Claude Annette wrote on this day, the victors are singing a song of victory, and quite rightly too. Among all these blabbers, they alone acted. Today, they are reaping the harvest. Bravo, fine work. The Mensheviks estimated the situation quite otherwise. 24 hours have passed since the victory of the Bolsheviks, wrote Dan's paper, and the historic fates have already begun to take their cruel revenge. Around them is an emptiness created by themselves. They are isolated from all. The entire clerical and technical machinery refuses to serve them. They are sliding at that very moment of their triumph into the abyss. Shout out to Nelson. He says, I hate the term usurpers. Yes, it sounds like somebody is going to suck you up, like you're going to be sucked up by a serpent. But why do you hate the word usurpers? Continuing here. The liberal and compromisist circles, encouraged by the sabotage of the functionaries and their own light-mindedness, believed strangely in their own impunity. They spoke and wrote of the Bolsheviks in the language of the July days. Hirelings of Wilhelm, the pockets of the Red Guard full of German marks. German officers in command of the insurrection. The new government had to show these people a firm hand before they began to believe in it. The more unbridled papers were detained already on the night of the 26th. Some others were confiscated on the following day. The socialist press, for the time being, was spared. It was necessary to give the left social revolutionaries and also some elements of the Bolshevik Party a chance to convince themselves of the groundlessness of the hope for coalition with the official democracy. The Bolsheviks developed their victory amid sabotage and chaos. A provisional military headquarters organized during the night undertook the defense of Petrograd in case of an attack from Kerensky. Military telephone men were sent to the Central Exchange where a strike had begun. It was proposed to the armies that they create their own military revolutionary committees. Gangs of agitators and organizers, freed by the victory, were sent to the front and to the provinces. The central organ of the party wrote, the Petrograd Soviet has acted. It is the turn of the other Soviets. Nelson says, usurpers is an ad hominem that favors the status quo most of the time. I believe so. Yeah. And I believe that Trotsky is writing these chapters so vividly because he's fighting against this this common belief that the Bolshevik Revolution was a type of putsch, a coup d'etat, usurpation of power by some shadowy group, when really, you know, it was masses and masses and masses of people that came together to say that we want to try this new thing. We want to make a new society where workers' councils and peasant councils will dictate society rather than rich people sitting in offices with suits and ties telling us how our society needs to be run. Anyway, news came during the day which especially disturbed the soldiers. Kornilov has escaped. As a matter of fact, the lofty captive who had been living in Baikov, guarded by Tekinsky, loyal to him, and kept in touch with all events by Kerensky's headquarters, decided on the 26th that things were taking a serious turn, and without the slightest hindrance from anybody abandoned his pretended prison. Okay? Kornilov had escaped from prison. Okay, so basically the right-wing bastard is now back on the loose. Okay. The connections between Kerensky and Kornilov were thus again obviously confirmed in the eyes of the masses. The Military Revolutionary Committee summoned the soldiers and the revolutionary officers by telegram to capture both former commanders-in-chief and deliver them in Petrograd. As had the Tauride Palace in February, so now Smolny became the focal point for all functions of the capital and the state. Here, all the ruling institutions had their seat. Here, orders were issued, and hither people came to get them. Hence, a demand went out for weapons, and hither came rifles and revolvers confiscated from the enemy. Arrested people were brought in here from all ends of the city. The injured began to flow in seeking justice. The bourgeois public and his frightened cab drivers made a great yoke-shaped detour to avoid the Smolny region. The automobile is a far more genuine sign of present-day sovereignty than the orb and scepter. Under the regime of dual power, the automobiles have been divided between the government, the Central Executive Committee, and private owners. Now all confiscated motors were dragged into the camp of the insurrection. The Smolny district looked like a giant military garage. The best of automobiles smoked in those days from the low-grade petrol. Motorcycles chugged impatiently and threateningly in the semi-darkness. Armored cars shrieked their sirens. Smolny seemed like a factory, a railroad, and power station of the revolution. A steady flood of people poured along the sidewalks of the adjoining streets. Bonfires were burning at the outer and inner gates. By their wavering light, armed workers and soldiers were belligerently inspecting passes. A number of armored cars stood shaking with the action of their own motors in the court. Nothing wanted to stop moving, machines or people. At each entrance stood machine guns abundantly supplied with cartridge belts. The endless, weakly lighted, gloomy corridors echoed with the tramping of feet, with exclamations and shouts. The arriving and departing poured up and down the broad staircase. And the solid human lava would be cut through by impatient and imperative individuals. Smolny workers, couriers, commissars, a mandate or an order lifted high in their hand, a rifle on a cord slung over their shoulder, or a portfolio under their arm. The Military Revolutionary Committee never stopped working for an instant. It received delegates, couriers, volunteer informers, devoted friends, and scoundrels. It sent commissars to all corners of the town, set innumerable seals upon orders and commands and credentials. All this in the midst of intersecting inquiries, urgent communications, the ringing of telephone bells, and the rattle of weapons. People utterly exhausted of their force, long without sleep or eating, unshaven, in dirty linen, with inflamed eyes, would shout in hoarse voices, gesticulate fantastically, and if they did not fall half dead on the floor, it seemed only thanks to the surrounding chaos which whirled them about and carried them away again on its unharnessed wings. Adventurers, crooks, the worst off-scouring of the old regime, would sniff about and try to get a pass to Smolny. Some of them succeeded. They knew some little secret of administration, who has the key to the diplomatic correspondence, how to write an order on the treasury, where to get gasoline or a typewriter, and especially where the best court wines are kept. They did not at all find their cell or bullets immediately. Okay, so, the bourgeoisie, beforehand, they were hating on the Bolsheviks. Now, look at them trying to get into Smolny. How are they going to hate outside the club? They can't even get in. Some of them are trying to sneak in saying, hey, bruh, I know where all the bad Georgian wine is. Hey, bro, I can get you some bad bitches. You know what I'm saying? Like, they trying to get in. They trying to get in the club, trying to get in the Bolshevik club. Look at that. All these people, anti-communists before, but now they want to be communists when they start running shit. Okay? Something to keep in mind. Never since the creation of the world have so many orders been issued, by word of mouth, by pencil, by typewriter, by wire, one following after the other. Thousands and myriads of orders, not always issued by those having the right, and rarely to those capable of carrying them out. But just here lay the miracle, that in this crazy whirlpool there turned out to be an inner meaning. People managed to understand each other. The most important and necessary things got done. Replacing the old web of administration, the first threads of the new were strung. The revolution grew in strength. During that day, the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks was at work in Smolny. It was deciding the problem of the new government of Russia. No minutes were kept, or they have not been preserved. Nobody was bothering about future historians, although a lot of trouble was being prepared for them right there. The evening session of the Congress was to create a cabinet of ministers. Ministers? What a sadly compromised word. It stinks of the high bureaucratic career, the crowning of some parliamentary ambition. It was decided to call the government the Soviet of People's Commissars. That at least had a fresher sound. Since the, okay, Trotsky is just being silly. He's like, ministers, ministers. That's not gangster. Let's call them commissars. I like that. I like that, man. Shout out to my top commissar, Nelson Moreno, right now. He just sent a motherfucker to the gulag. So yeah, commissar sounds more hard. And recently, somebody I heard on Bourgeois News, I think it was either CNN or MSNBC, they were, critiquing all the DSA candidates who had recently won. And one of them was saying, like, the DSA wants to abolish the Senate. After reading some Marxist theory, I do think that's absolutely true. The Senate as it stands right now does not represent the people at all. You have states with smaller populations than cities in California. I'm looking at you, South and North Dakota. You know what I'm saying? Iowa, etc. All these states get 2 senators, even though they have 2 people. Meanwhile, people in California, 40 million people, 20 million people in New York only get 2 senators too? And sure, they get a larger percentage of the House of Representatives, but that's based on the census. And the census is, greatly undercounted. There are many people that do not reply to the census, and they just have, great computer programs and statistical models to help them figure out the population, but it's still roughly a guess. Nobody actually knows how many people are in the U.S. So saying that, states like California get more representatives is still bullshit, because the Senate ultimately holds the power. And on top of that, when you have the filibuster, nothing can get passed in the Senate. So what are we supposed to do? You get what I'm saying? So yeah, the Senate should be abolished, and there needs to be a better democracy. Once again, this is why we say, after reading this book, I'm dropping many of the lessons I've learned from this book, okay? Many of the lessons I learned from this book is essentially how liberal democracy is bullshit. After reading this book, I have started using the word liberal as a slur. And before reading this book, I never used that before. I do believe, salute to my comrade, longtime commenter, Kareth, who says that I was captured by bourgeois thinking. I do believe that's true. I do believe a lot of us are going through the deprogramming right now of getting the bourgeois thinking out of our minds. But after reading this book, I'm going to be using liberal as a slur. I'm still going to have a lot of heat for, the fascists, the right-wingers, the MAGA cultists, of course. But, this book really, really turned me off from liberalism and, bourgeois politics in general. You get what I'm saying? All right. But anyway, Nelson says, I've been hating on liberals for 3 years. Yeah. Sorry for coming late to the party. Sorry for coming late to the party. Okay. All right. Continuing here. So since the negotiations for a coalition of the entire democracy had come to nothing, the question of the party and personal staff of the government was simplified. The left social revolutionaries minced and objected. Having just broken with the party of Kerensky, they themselves hardly knew what they wanted to do. The Central Committee adopted the motion of Lenin as the only unthinkable one, to form a government of Bolsheviks only. Okay. Nelson says, Gaza massively exposed liberals. Yeah. One of the defining political moments of my life was, becoming more and more aware of, how the people of Gaza are reflected, or how Palestinians in general, how they have been neglected and affected by American foreign policy for so long, has greatly shaped, my life in direct ways. And the final hurdle, and I'm still overcoming hurdles, but one of the largest hurdles, I'll say, that I had to overcome over the past few years is my Black American cultural chauvinism or nationalism, in the sense that, I was captured by FBA, ADOS thinking for some time, essentially saying what happens in Gaza has no opinion on me. And to some degree, I'm actually happy it's happening to them because many of the Arabs are anti-black. Now, this is silly and silly in a lot of ways for reasons I've spoken about before. But if we think about it, one of the reasons that Osama flew them planes into the buildings was because of America's continued support for Israel and its treatment of the Palestinians, right? I lost a friend to suicide after serving in Iraq and Afghanistan directly because of that. Many Americans have lost family members and friends due to our wars that were caused after 9/11. 9/11 was my first major political moment in my life, you know what I mean, that I witnessed and was a part of. In fact, no, I take that back. George Bush stealing the 2000 election. I remember watching that on TV and being shocked that that happened. You know, that's my first real political memory. Then after that, 9/11. Then after that, 2008 financial crash. You get what I'm saying? Then after that, seeing, the wealth gap in America continue to increase throughout the 2010s. You get what I'm saying? COVID, Trump, it's been just hell, that I've witnessed during my 35 years on this earth. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, when it comes to hating on liberals, I'm kind of late, but I'm sorry. I will be the biggest hater for the liberals. I promise you. Continuing here. Martov knocked at the door of this session in the capacity of intercessor for the arrested socialist ministers. Not so long ago, he had been interceding with the socialist ministers for the imprisoned Bolsheviks. The wheel had made a quite sizable turn. Through one of its members sent out to Martov for negotiations, most probably Kamenev, the Central Committee confirmed the statement that the socialist ministers would be transferred to house arrest. Apparently, they had been forgotten in the rush of business, or perhaps had themselves declined privileges. Adhering even in Trubetskoy Bastion to the principle of ministerial solidarity. The Congress opened to session at 9 o'clock in the evening. The picture on the whole was but little different from yesterday. Fewer weapons, less of a jam. Sukhanov, now no longer a delegate, was able to find himself a free seat as one of the public. This session was to decide the question of peace, land, and government. Only 3 questions: end the war, give the land to the people, establish a socialist dictatorship. Kamenev began with a report of the work done by the Presidium during the day. The death penalty at the front introduced by Kerensky abolished, complete freedom of agitation restored, orders given for the liberation of soldiers imprisoned for political convictions, and members of land committees, all the commissars of the provisional government removed from office. Orders given to arrest and deliver Kerensky and Kornilov. The Congress approved and ratified these measures. Again, some remnants took the floor, to the impatient disapproval of the hall. One group announced that they were withdrawing at the moment of the victory of the insurrection and not at the moment of its defeat. Others bragged of the day that they had decided to remain. A representative of the Donetsk miners urged immediate measures to prevent Kaledin from cutting the North off from coal. Some time must pass, however, before the revolution learns to take measures of such scope. Finally, it becomes possible to take up the first point on the order of the day. Lenin, whom the Congress has not yet seen, is given the floor for a report on peace. His appearance in the tribune evokes a tumultuous greeting. The trenched delegates gaze with all their eyes at this mysterious being, whom they had been taught to hate and whom they had learned without seeing him to love. Now Lenin, gripping the edge of the reading stand, let little winking eyes travel over the crowd as he stood there waiting, apparently oblivious to the long rolling of the ovation, which lasted several minutes. When it finished, he said simply, "We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order." Bars. Bars. Think about this, man. Lenin was a black gay trans woman in, early 20th century Russia, living on the fringes of society, hiding out in barns and couch surfing from people's houses, wanted by the government, could have been assassinated. And here comes Lenin in a, sequin, diamond, bestudded dress, form-fitting in nature, elegant as all can be. She comes to the stage, grabs the podium, and the Lenin's first words as she or he or they, the goddess, becomes the most powerful person in Russia. She says, "We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order." And the crowd goes crazy. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Continuing here. The minutes of the Congress are not preserved. The parliamentary stenographers invited in to record the debates had abandoned Smolny, along with the Mensheviks and social revolutionaries. That was one of the first episodes in the campaign of sabotage. The secretarial notes have been lost without a trace in the abyss of events. There remain only the hasty and tedious newspaper reports, written to the tune of the artillery or the grinding of teeth in the political struggle. Lenin's speeches have suffered especially owing to his swift delivery and the complicated construction of his sentences. They are not easily recorded even in more favorable conditions. The initial statements which John Reed puts in the mouth of Lenin does not appear in any of the newspaper accounts, but it is wholly in the spirit of the orator. Reed could not have made it up. Just in that way, Lenin must surely have begun his speech at the Congress of Soviets. Simply, without unction, with flexible confidence, we shall now proceed to construct the socialist order. We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order. Something is just so ill about that. Once again, there's been great buildup in this story. I mean, this is Hollywood, bro. The way Trotsky puts this together is so fucking Hollywood. You know what I'm saying? You have so many instances where it's like one-liners are dropped, after the bad guy just got domed. The explosion happens behind, and then, Trotsky just drops a bar as he walks away in slow-mo. Like, we shall now proceed to construct the socialist order should be something that I think every, Marxist can quote. We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order. I'm sorry, I can't stop saying that. That just puts a smile on my face. Anyway, but for this, it was first of all necessary to end the war. From his exile in Switzerland, Lenin had thrown out the slogan, "Convert the imperialist war into a civil war." Now it was time to convert the victorious civil war into peace. The speaker began immediately by reading the draft of a declaration to be published by the government still to be elected. The text had not been distributed, technical equipment being still very weak. The Congress drank in every word of the document as pronounced. The workers' and peasants' government created by the Revolution of October 24th through the 25th and resting upon the Soviet of Workers, Soldiers, and Peasants' Deputies proposes to all the warring peoples and their governments to open immediate negotiations for a just democratic peace. Just conditions exclude annexations and indemnities. By annexations is to be understood the forceful ascension of alien peoples or the retention of them against their will, either in Europe or in remote lands over the seas. Herewith, the government declares that it by no means considers the above indicated conditions of peace ultimative. That is, it agrees to examine any other conditions, demanding only the quickest possible opening of negotiations and the absence of any secrecy in their conduct. On its part, the Soviet government abolishes secret diplomacy and undertakes to publish the secret treaties concluded before October 25th in 1917. Everything in those treaties directed toward the accruing of profit and privilege to the Russian landlords and capitalists and the oppression of other peoples by the great Russians, the government declares unconditionally and immediately annulled. In order to enter upon negotiations, it is proposed to conclude an immediate armistice for not less than 3 months at least. The workers' and peasant government addresses its proposals simultaneously to the government and peoples of all warring countries, especially the conscious workers of the 3 most advanced countries, England, France, and Germany, confident that it is they who will help us successfully carry through the business of liberating the toilers and the exploited masses of the population from all slavery and all exploitation. Lenin dropping Order 66. Yes, Nelson is in the chat. Finally, he's plugged in. My nigga is plugged in for real, for real. Lenin executed Order 66, and Order 66 is essentially saying we will no longer be a white supremacist imperial empire. Think about that, man. He's saying the Great Russians, and when he says Great Russians, he means white Russians. Lenin is saying here, and all the Bolsheviks are, hearing him. He's the leader. He's saying, like, the Great Russians are no longer going to be a white supremacist imperial force. We are exiting the war immediately, and all nationalities within Russia are, by extension, I guess, free as well. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, we are no longer in this war anymore. And on top of that, there's no more secret diplomacy. Any backroom deals between diplomats, bureaucrats, business people, made in these smoke-filled rooms in the back. No more secret diplomacy. And this is very important for us. This is very important for us because this is how we found out about Sykes-Picot. Trotsky is not going to write about that. But that's how we found out about Sykes-Picot. And if you don't know what Sykes-Picot is, it's essentially when the British and the French decided they're going to carve up the Middle East just with a ruler and lines on paper and essentially created all the fuck shit that we now live with in our current day. You know what I mean? Whether it be, Iraq and Iran hating each other, whether it be Syria being a failed state, Jordan essentially being owned by the Americans, Israel being the owners of America, and the Palestinians getting fucked from all sides. That's essentially Sykes-Picot. And we would not know about that had it not been for the Soviets, and especially Lenin saying no more secret diplomacy. And the reason Lenin is doing this, the reason Lenin, our beautiful trans black woman communist comrade, the reason Lenin is saying this is that, he wants the workers in England, France, and Germany to also join on the revolution. The goal is, of course, to spread the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Revolution, to the most advanced capitalist countries. That way, in their mind, they believe the revolution can succeed and total worker liberation can be found. Okay? So, Lenin limited himself to brief comments on the text of the declaration. We cannot ignore the governments. For them, the possibility of concluding peace will be delayed. But we have no right not to appeal at the same time to the people. The people and the governments are everywhere at variance, and we ought to help the people interfere in the matter of war and peace. We will, of course, defend in all possible ways our program of peace without annexations or indemnities. But we ought not to present our conditions in the form of an ultimatum, as that will make it easier for the government to refuse to negotiate. We will consider also every other proposal. Consider does not mean that we will accept it. The manifesto issued by the compromisers on March 14th proposed to the workers of other countries to overthrow the bankers in the name of peace. However, the compromisers themselves not only did not demand the overthrow of their own bankers, but entered into league with them. Now we have overthrown the government of the bankers. That gives us a right to summon the other peoples to do the same. We have every hope of victory. It must be remembered that we live not in the depths of Africa, but in Europe, where everything can become quickly known. Okay, a little bit of white chauvinism there, and a little bit of African obscurism. But what Trotsky is essentially saying here is that, or Lenin is saying here, is that, by giving out this order that we're going to leave the war, we're trying to, tell all the other workers in Europe that now is the time for revolution. All right? Bro Boy in the horizontal live stream says Trotsky wanted a global revolution. Stalin kept it confined to one country, Russia. That is correct. Okay, by and large, yes, that is correct. I guess I'll ask, what do you think? What do you think? Anyway, continuing here. It must be remembered that we live not in the depths of Africa, says Lenin, but in Europe, where everything can become quickly known. The guarantee of victory Lenin sees, as always, in converting the national into an international revolution. The workers' movement will get the upper hand and lay down the road to peace and socialism. Okay? By Guy Nelson Moreno asks, how many pages left? We got quite a few pages. We might be on live for another hour or so. So yeah, if you gotta go, you gotta go. I'll see you later, alligator. You're always welcome back, and thank you for being here. Anyway, the left social revolutionaries sent up a representative to present their adherence to the Declaration. Its spirit and meaning are close and understandable to us. The United Internationalists were for the Declaration, but only on condition that it be issued by a government of the entire democracy. Lapinski, speaking for the Polish left Mensheviks, welcomed the healthy proletarian realism of the document. Zezerinsky for the Social Democracy of Poland and Lithuania, Stuchka for the Social Democracy of Latvia, Kapuskas for the Lithuanian Social Democracy, adhered to the declaration without qualification. The only objection was offered by the Bolshevik Eremiv, who demanded that the peace conditions be given the character of an ultimatum. Otherwise, they may think that we are weak, that we are afraid. Lenin decisively, even fiercely, objected to the ultimate presentation of the conditions. In that way, he said, we will only make it possible for our enemies to conceal the whole truth from the people, to hide the truth behind our irreconcilability. You say that our not presenting an ultimatum will show our impotence. It is time to have done with bourgeois falsities in politics. We need not be afraid of telling the truth about our wariness. The future disagreement of Brest-Litovsk gleam out for a moment already in this episode. Very interesting, okay? So, very interesting. If I understand right, this guy Eremiv is saying that the peace treaty is not given as an ultimatum. Yes. So this other Bolshevik, Eremiv, is saying like, Lenin, let's not send this proposal that we're going to leave the war, that we don't want any more imperialism, and that we're going to publish all the secret documents. Let's not send that as an ultimatum, because that will come across as weak. And Lenin says, we have to get rid of these bourgeois falsities. We cannot think that, we have to present in a certain type of way. We need not be afraid of telling the truth about our wariness, says Lenin. Yes, everybody knows that Russia has been weakened by World War I. And shout out to Germany. Shout out to the guy from Germany tuning in. He's probably not going to like this because I have a lot of praise for the GDR, okay, the German Democratic Republic. And I know that's not very popular here. But nevertheless, I digress. So, yeah, Lenin is saying, we need to not be afraid. We're going to put out this ultimatum, and we're going to deal with our enemies like peers. And we're not going to bolster in fronts like we're big and bad. Yes, we were able to have a revolution in our country, but yes, we are still very weak. You get what I'm saying? So, continuing here, Kamenev asked all who were for the proclamation to raise their delegate cards. One delegate, writes Reed, dared to raise his hand against, but the sudden sharp outburst around him brought it swiftly down. The appeal to the peoples and government was adopted unanimously. The deed was done, and it impressed all the participants by its close and immediate magnitude. Sukhanov, an attentive, although also prejudiced observer, noticed more than once at that first session the listlessness of the Congress. Undoubtedly, the delegates, like all the people, indeed, were tired of meetings, congresses, speeches, resolutions, tired of the whole business of marking time. They had no confidence that this Congress would be able and know how to carry the thing through to the end. Will not the gigantic size of the task and the insuperable opposition compel them back down this time too? An influx of confidence had come with the news of the capture of the Winter Palace, and afterward with the coming over of the bicycle men to the insurrection. But both these facts still had to do with the mechanics of insurrection. Only now was its historic meaning becoming clear in action. The victorious insurrection had built under this Congress of workers and soldiers an indestructible foundation of power. The delegates were voting this time, not for a resolution, not for a proclamation, but for a governmental act of immeasurable significance. Very interesting. So they were transmitting, the democratic practices of these Soviet halls, voting in mass on resolutions and stuff. But now they had taken that democratic power all the way to, seizing the reins of power, seizing the state, and making something new. And very interesting here that Trotsky is saying, like, the Bolsheviks and the people were able to seize the state and make something new, but it was sort of like it wasn't conscious in a way. Like they just sort of did it in the sense that, they weren't saying this is the new organ. They did give a new name to the organ, but it wasn't like, okay, that one is done and now this one is doing this and we're following the book, exactly what Lenin said. It's sort of like, no, it was sort of like a natural process and outgrowth. All right. So continuing here. Listen, nations, the revolution offers you peace. It will be accused of violating treaties, but of this it is proud. To break up the leagues of bloody predation is the greatest historic service. The Bolsheviks have dared to do it. They alone have dared. Pride surges up of its own accord. Eyes shine. All are on their feet. No one is smoking now. It seems as though no one breathes. The presidium, the delegates, the guests, the sentries join in a hymn of insurrection and brotherhood. Suddenly, by common impulse, the story will soon be told by John Reed, observer and participant, chronicler and poet of the insurrection. We found ourselves on our feet, mumbling together into the smooth, lifting unison of the Internationale. A grizzled old soldier was sobbing like a child. Alexandra Kollontai rapidly winked the tears back. The immense sound rolled through the hall, burst windows and doors, and soared into the quiet sky. Did it go altogether into the sky? Did it not go also to the autumn trenches that hatch work upon unhappy, crucified Europe, to her devastated cities and villages, to her mothers and wives in mourning? Arise, ye prisoners of starvation, arise, ye wretched of the earth. The words of the song were freed of all qualifications. They fused with the decree of the government, and hence resounded with the force of a direct act. Everyone felt greater and more important in that hour. The heart of the revolution enlarged to the width of the whole world. We will achieve emancipation, the spirit of independence, of initiative, of daring, those joyous feelings of which the oppressed in ordinary conditions are deprived. The revolution had brought them now, with our own hand, the omnipotent hand of those millions who had overthrown the monarchy and the bourgeoisie would now strangle the war. The Red Guard from the Viborg district, the gray soldier with his scar, the old revolutionist who had served his years at hard labor, the young black-bearded sailor from the Aurora, all vowed to carry through to the end this last and deciding fight. We will build our own new world. We will build in that world, eagerly spoken from the heart, was included already the future years of the Civil War and the coming 5-year periods of labor and privation. Who was nothing shall be all. All if the actualities of the past have often been turned into song. Why shall not a song be turned into the actuality of the future? Those trench coats no longer seem the costumes of galley slaves. The papakai with their holes and torn cotton took a new aspect above those gleaming eyes. The race of man shall rise again. It is possible to believe that it will not rise from the misery and humiliation, the blood and filth of this war. I don't know the International. I'm sorry. I'm that one guy that doesn't know the International. Then again, I started my leftward journey abroad in non-English speaking countries. To be frank, if I return to America, I will be in community with more leftists and socialists and communists. So I'm pretty sure I'll learn the International by osmosis, if that does happen. But if you know the International, how did you learn it? Where did you first hear it? Because when I was out here in Budapest, Hungary, a few months ago, actually, when they had the election, I was with a bunch of leftists and communists, and they were all singing the song. And I had no idea what it was. And they were singing it all night until I asked my Trotskyist friend, ironically enough, what does it mean? And he told me, oh, that's the International. I'm like, oh, I'm so stupid. I'm stupid. Anyway, continuing here. The whole presidium, with Lenin at its head, stood and sang with excited and raptured faces and shining eyes. Thus testifies a skeptic gazing with heavy feelings upon an alien triumph. How much I wanted to join it, confesses Sukhanov, to fuse in one feeling and mood with that mass and its leaders. But I could not. The last sound of the anthem died away, but the Congress remained standing, a fused human mass enchanted by the greatness of that which they had experienced. And the eyes of many rested on the short, sturdy figure of the man in the tribune with his extraordinary head, his high cheekbones and simple features, altered now by the shaved beard, and with that gaze of his small, slightly Mongol eyes, which looked straight through everything. For 4 months he had been absent. His very name had almost separated itself from any living image. But no, he was not a myth. There he stood among his own. How many now of his own, holding the sheets of a message of peace to the peoples of the world in his hand. Even those nearest, those who knew well his place in the party, for the first time fully realized what he meant to the revolution, to the people, to the peoples. It was he who had taught them. It was he who had brought them up. Somebody's voice from the depth of the hall shouted a word of greetings to the leader. The hall seemed only to have awaited the signal. Long live Lenin. The anxieties endured, the doubts overcome, pride of initiative, triumph of victory, gigantic hopes, all poured out together in one volcanic eruption of gratitude and rapture. The skeptical observer dryly remarks, undoubted enthusiasm of mood. They greeted Lenin, shouted hurrah, threw their caps in the air. They sang the funeral march in memory of the victims of war. And again applause, shouts, throwing of caps in the air. This is a beautiful scene because when I think of Lenin, once again, I'm thinking of Law Roach. I'm thinking of RuPaul. I'm thinking of, who was that guy that was just with that guy from Hollywood Unlocked? Hollywood Unlocked. He just did an interview. Yes, Jason Lee. Jason Lee did an interview with that famous trans woman. I forgot her name. I listened to the interview and that was actually pretty funny. Yeah, it was Jason Lee. Who did he interview not that long ago? That was a trans woman. Sorry, I'm taking a little break. Okay, Jason Lee interviews T.S. Madison, yes. If I make the Hamilton version of Trotsky's book, I'm picking T.S. Madison as Lenin. And this scene is going to be so beautiful because all the people are going to be clapping, long live Lenin, and T.S. Madison is just going to say, you know, bow and show a lot of breasticle. Show a lot of cleavage. Anyway, T.S. Madison. Anyway, what the Congress experienced during those minutes was experienced on the next day, although less compactly by the whole country. It must be said, writes Stankovic in his memoirs, that the bold gesture of the Bolsheviks, their ability to step over the barbed wire entanglements, which had for years divided us from the neighboring peoples, created of itself an enormous impression. Baron Budberg expresses himself more crudely, but no less succinctly in his diary. The new government of Comrade Lenin went off with a decree for immediate peace. This was now an act of genius for bringing the soldier masses to his side. I saw this in the mood of several regiments, which I made the rounds of today. The telegram of Lenin on an immediate 3-month armistice and then peace created a colossal impression everywhere and evoked stormy joy. We have now lost the last chance of saving the front. By saving the fronts which they had ruined, those men had long ceased to mean anything but saving their own social positions. If the revolution had had the determination to step over the barbed wire entanglements in March and April, it might still have soldered the army together for a time, provided the army was at the same time reduced to half or a third its size, and thus created for its foreign policy a position of exceptional force. But the hour of courageous action struck only in October, when to save even a part of the army for even a short period was unthinkable. The new government had to load upon itself the debt, not only for the war of Tsarism, but also for the spendthrift light-mindedness of the provisional government. In this dreadful and for all other parties hopeless situation, Only Bolshevism could lead the country out on an open road, having uncovered through the October Revolution inexhaustible resources of national energy. Shout out to my comrade Kareth. He says, pause. Okay, once again, it's very interesting. When you bring up trans people, now everybody wants to come out the woodwork. People be watching silently, then you mention a trans person, then they jump out the window. But why pause? We don't pause for Lenin. We know Lenin was the most successful revolutionary of the 20th century. He was a man that changed the world. And he's one of our ideological and intellectual forefathers when we think about anti-imperialism and anti-capitalist struggle. So why do you want to pause just because we bring up the fact that he, she, they, the goddess, was a black gay communist trans woman who was homeless as well? Okay, why? Lenin is again in the Tribune, this time with the little sheets of a decree on land. He begins with an indictment of the overthrown government and the compromisist parties, who by dragging out the land question have brought the country to a peasant revolt. Their talk about pogroms and anarchy in the country's rings, false with cowardly deceit. Where and when have pogroms and anarchy have been caused by reasonable measures? Their talk about pogroms and anarchy in the country rings false with cowardly deceit. Where and when have pogroms and anarchy been caused by reasonable measures? The draft of the decree has not been multigraphed for distribution. The speaker has the sole rough draft in his hands, and it is written so badly, Sukhanov remembers, that Lenin stumbles in the reading, gets mixed up, and finally stops entirely. Somebody from the crowd jammed around the Tribune comes to his help. Lenin eagerly yields his place and the undecipherable paper. These rough spots did not, however, in the eyes of that plebeian parliament, diminish by an iota the grandeur of which was taking place. So basically, Lenin just said, we're going to start building socialism. What was our phrase? Let us start the socialist construction of society. You get what I'm saying? So Lenin has his first decree about, the land reforms that the Bolsheviks are going to do. And because Lenin's nails are so long, Lenin's got the very long acrylic joints. Remember, if you've seen the movie Baps with Halle Berry, Baps had, the characters had the beehives and the long nails. Lenin couldn't write out the first decree because he didn't have enough time to pop off the acrylics. You get what I'm saying? So he had to, try to pen it, and other people had to help him read it, okay? So the essence of the decree is contained in 2 lines of the first point. The landlord's property in the land is annulled immediately and without any indemnity whatever. This is the thing. I'm sure a lot of people would agree with Lenin's policies right now. Imagine all landlord property is gone and you get no fucking, reparations for us seizing your landlord property. A lot of people would like that right now. No more rent. We having no more rent parties, my nigga. I'm buying more Steve Harvey suits, bitch. I'm buying more Steve Harvey suits if I don't gotta pay the rent, for real. The landlord's property in the land is annulled immediately and without any indemnity whatever. The landlord, appanage, monastery, and church estates with all their goods and chattels are given in charge of the town land committees and county soviets of peasant deputies until the Constituent Assembly. The confiscated property is placed as a national possession under the protection of the local soviets. The land of the rank-and-file peasants and rank-and-file Cossacks is protected against confiscation. The whole decree does not come to more than 30 lines. It smashes the Gordian knot with a hammer. I think, wouldn't it make better to cut it with some scissors or a knife? But I guess. Anyway. To the fundamental text, certain broad instructions are adjoined, borrowed wholly from the peasants themselves. In Izvestia of the Peasant Soviet, there had been printed on August 19th a summary of 242 instructions given by the electors to their representatives at the First Congress of Peasant Deputies. Notwithstanding that it was the social revolutionaries who prepared these collated instructions, Lenin did not hesitate to attach the document in its entirety to his decree for guidance in carrying out the great land transformation. The collated instructions read, the right to private property in the land is annulled forever. The right to use the land is accorded to all citizens, desiring to cultivate it with their own labor. Hired labor is not permitted. The use of land must be equalized. That is, the land is to be divided among the toilers according to local conditions on the basis of standards either of labor or consumption. Very important. But remember, Lenin said that the small landowners, their land is not touched. Remember? He said that the land of the Cossacks and the rank and file peasants, if you're just a regular guy who's got like 1 acre or something like that, that's yours. You get what I'm saying? But these large landowners, yeah, none of that no more. No more, basically being a billionaire landowner. You get what I'm saying? Continuing here. All right. So Kareth says, greatest hypothetical, in my opinion, is what if Haiti never paid the indemnity? To some degree, I think that Haiti would have still ended up in a situation where they would have been isolated. Remember, many of the countries did not recognize Haiti, even if, they started paying the indemnity and made those regular payments for France for over 100 years. You get what I'm saying? It was a long time until the U.S. recognized them and other European nations recognized them. Or if I got history wrong, they started paying the indemnity to make other countries recognize them. I could easily see that Haiti doesn't pay the indemnity, and then, the Dominican Republic is encouraged to, just conquer all of Hispaniola and subjugate the Haitian people. Maybe even reinstituting slavery. I don't know. Anyway, on topic, guys, on topic. Under a continuation of the bourgeois regime, to say nothing of a coalition with the landlords, these social revolutionary instructions remained a lifeless utopia where they did not become a conscious lie. Even under the rule of the proletariat, they did not become realizable in all their sections. But the destiny of the instructions radically changed with a change in the attitude toward them of the governmental power. The workers' state gave the peasants a period in which to try out their self-contradictory program in action. The peasants want to keep their small properties, wrote Lenin in August, standardize them on a basis of equality, and periodically re-equalize them. Let them do it. No reasonable socialist will break with the peasant poor on that ground. If the lands are confiscated, that means that the rule of the banks is undermined. If the equipment is confiscated, that means that the rule of capital is undermined. The rest, with the transfer of political power to the proletariat, will be suggested by practice. Very interesting what Lenin is saying right here. He's essentially saying, because we have to remember that there were 3 basic parties during the time of the October Revolution. You had the Mensheviks, which were basically, let's say social democrats, like Bernie Sanders types, tax the billionaires, right? You have the left revolutionaries who are more like the working families party. You find them out in the Midwest somewhere and they got like a few people who are really fucking radical, but they just want to sort of reform the way things are done like in a local community. But in the Russian context, it's more about the land. The Social Revolutionary Party was the peasant party. They were the ones that appealed most to the peasantry. And then you had the Bolsheviks, which by and large, roughly speaking, were full of the most radical of these socialists that came after the February Revolution, right? And so the peasants want to try this new sort of, socialist thing where, some of the people get to keep their land and then they divide it up every few months again to re-equalize things. And this is not in the Marxist-Leninist playbook for how to organize society in a more equitable way. But Lenin is saying, listen, you have to sometimes let people learn on their own. And this has been one of the wisest lessons we have learned from this book. The Bolsheviks, Trotsky, Lenin, all of these people had to learn from the people. And the people had to learn from them. It's the dialectic. You get what I'm saying? So what Lenin is saying, let the people, these peasants, find out the hard way that their individualized, socialist utopian experiment that they want to do in the countryside is not going to work out in the long run. Because sometimes, things will be suggested by practice, as he said. Okay? All right. We have to put some people out of here. Please, all the people who are commissars, make sure that we ban some of these people, man. Okay? All right, continuing here. Kareth says, I wonder if Trotsky ever imagined that the proletarian vanguard would betray the revolution as they did in '89. I believe he always thought that was possible. We just were speaking about Martov, Martov was a Marxist. These people back then were highly educated or literate in terms of Marxism. They had read all the stuff because back then there wasn't much to read. There wasn't much to read. There were still only a few. But these were people who literally translated Das Kapital into Russian and German ideology into Russian. Martov was over here saying, like, guys, we have to compromise. We have to compromise. So yeah, I do think he thought it was possible through several of the chapters, if you have been paying attention. If you were paying attention, through several of the chapters, Trotsky speaks about how, the people that claim to be socialists, that claim to be on the side of the working poor, were actively working against it, and they should have known better. So yes, I don't think he would be surprised. And, he did say, Trotsky has a book later, I believe, published somewhere in 1930 something, called Revolution Betrayed, where he basically shits all over what the Soviet Union had become back in the 30s. You get what I'm saying? All right. Lemony Fresh Pine says the hard way is usually how people learn. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then when it comes to, little socialist experiments like that, like, hey guys, what if we just go in the woods and we just try to do a communism by ourselves? Like, that's a great way to find out, like, no, that's not going to get you very far. All right, continuing here. Trotsky says, a great many people, and not only enemies but friends, have failed to understand this far-sighted and to a certain extent pedagogical approach of the Bolshevik Party to the peasantry and its agrarian program. The equal distribution of land, objected Rosa Luxemburg, for example, has nothing in common with socialism. The Bolsheviks, it goes without saying, had no illusion upon this point. On the contrary, the very construction of the decree bears witness to the critical vigilance of the legislator. Whereas the collated instructions say that all the land, both that of the landlords and the peasants, is converted into national property. The basic decree does not commit itself at all as to the new form of property in the land. Even a none too pedantic jurist would be horrified at the fact that the nationalization of the land, a new social principle of world historic importance, is inaugurated in the form of a list of instructions adjoined to a basic law. But there was no reactionary slovenliness here. Lenin wanted as little as possible to tie the hands of the party and the Soviet power a priori in a still unexplored historic realm. Here again, he united unexampled audacity with the greatest caution. It still remained to determine and experience how the peasants themselves would understand the conversion of the land into the property of the whole people. Having made so long a dash forward, it was necessary to fortify the positions also in case a retreat should become necessary. The distribution of the landlord's land among the peasants, while not in itself a guarantee against bourgeois counter-revolution, made impossible in any case a feudal monarchic restoration. Very interesting. So what Trotsky is saying here is that Lenin was trying to play 4D chess. He's trying to cover all bases, and by essentially saying that, the people get to decide, the small peasants in the rural areas, they get to decide how the land is distributed under this new basis that all of the property belongs to the people, all of the land belongs to the people. This is a very new thing, and he's going to let them sort of figure it out amongst themselves. One thing that this helps with is that it doesn't cause the Bolsheviks to be caught up in trying to put out this fire or trying to deal with this very historic change of, communalizing all the land in the largest country in the world, okay? That's a major problem or something major to deal with that's going to cause a lot of headache when they have so many other things to deal with, like ending the war, nationalizing the factories, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there's that trial and error sort of thing. And also at the same time, this makes it so that a feudal monarchic restoration is not possible, that a new bourgeoisie can't come up, right? Or that this stops bourgeois counter-revolution from springing up, because the people do come with the understanding that all the land now belongs to all of us, okay? But the division of it, how we divide it up, is sort of like up to us. And so, yeah, the freedom of it a bit frees up the Bolsheviks to focus on larger things. Continuing here. It would be possible to speak of socialist perspectives only after the establishment and successful preservation of the proletarian power. And this power could preserve itself only by giving determined cooperation to the peasant in carrying out his revolution. If the distribution of land would strengthen the socialist government politically, it was then wholly justified as an immediate measure. The peasant had to be taken as the revolution found him. Only a new regime could re-educate him, and not at once, but in the course of a generation, with the help of a new technique and a new organization of industry. The decree, together with the instructions, meant that the dictatorship of the proletariat assumed an obligation, not only to take an attentive attitude towards the interest of the land laborer, but also to be patient of his illusions as a petty proprietor. It was clear in advance that there would be a number of stages and turning points in the agrarian revolution. The collated instructions were anything but the last word. They represented merely a starting point, which the workers agreed to occupy while helping the peasants to realize their progressive demands and warning them against false steps. Very interesting. So once again, this is not something that, anybody, or at least as far as my knowledge goes and what Trotsky is alluding to here, Marxists before had not thought about nationalizing all the land. And here they are sort of playing it by ear. And I do think that this was a wise step for Lenin to make. Lenin says, "We must not ignore," said Lenin in his speech, "the resolutions of the lower ranks of the people. Even though we are not in agreement with them, we must give full freedom to the creative capacity of the popular masses. The essence of the thing is that the peasantry should have full confidence that there are no more landlords in the country, and let the peasants themselves decide all questions and build their own life. Opportunism? No, it was revolutionary realism." Before even the applause was over, a right social revolutionary, Piankin, arrived from the Peasants' Executive Committee and took the floor with a furious protest on the subject of the socialist ministers being under arrest. "During the last days," cried the orator, pounding the table as though beside himself, "a thing is on foot which has never happened in any revolution. Our comrades, members of the Executive Committee, Maslov and Salasin, are locked up in prison. We demand their immediate release. If one hair falls from their heads," threatened another messenger in a military coat. "To the Congress, they both seem like visitors from another world." At the moment of the insurrection, there were about 800 men in prison in Dvinsk, charged with Bolshevism. In Minsk, about 6,000. In Kiev, 535. For the most part, soldiers. And how many members of the peasant committees were under lock and key in various parts of the country? Finally, a good share of the delegates to this very Congress, beginning with the Presidium, had passed through the prisons of Kerensky since July. No wonder the indignation of the friends of the provisional government could not pluck at any heartstrings in this assembly. To complete their bad luck, a certain delegate, unknown to anybody, a peasant from Tver, with long hair and a big sheepskin coat, rose in his place and, having bowed politely to all 4 points of the compass, adjured the Congress in the name of his electors not to hesitate at arresting Avksenstiev's executive committee as a whole. Those are not peasant deputies, but cadets. Their place is in prison. So they stood facing each other. These two figures, the social revolutionary Piankin, experienced parliamentarian, favorable of ministers, hater of Bolsheviks, and the nameless peasant from Tver who had brought Lenin a hearty salute from his electors. Two social strata, two revolutions. Piankin was speaking in the name of February. The Tver peasant was fighting for October. The Congress gave the delegate in a sheepskin coat a veritable ovation. The emissaries of the executive committee went away swearing. Very interesting. So, as Trotsky said before, arresting people after an insurrection or a revolution is just a part of the game. Hey, no hard feelings, buddy. But, sorry, right-wingers, fascists, liberals, reformers, compromisers, you got to go to the cell. We're doing an insurrection, we're revolutionizing the country, we're bringing socialism to the people. I'm sorry, you got to go to cell block 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, lock yourself up. And so even some of the socialists were arrested too, but the socialists were put on house arrest. But apparently that is, an offense to some of the socialists who were there, who are saying, please unarrest our leaders. But literally at the same time, the Bolsheviks had seized power on October 25th and 26th, etc. There were about 6,000 Bolsheviks locked up in various parts of the country or various parts of the Russian Empire. So, and they hadn't even been let go. So boo-hoo, all my niggas felons. All my niggas felons. So who you telling? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are we talking about here? All right. The resolution of Lenin is greeted by the social revolutionary faction as a triumph of their ideas, announces Kalagave. But in view of the extraordinary importance of the question, we must take it up in caucus. A maximalist representative of the extreme left wing of the disintegrated Social Revolutionary Party demands an immediate vote. We ought to give honor to a party which on the very first day and without any blabber brings such a measure to life. Lenin insisted that the intermission should be at any rate as short as possible. News so important to Russia should be in print by morning, no filibustering. The decree on land was not only indeed the foundation of the new regime, but also a weapon of the revolution, which had still to conquer the country. It is not surprising that Reed records at that moment an imperative shout breaking through the noise of the hall. 15 agitators wanted in room 17 at once to go to the front. At 1 o'clock in the morning, a delegate from the Russian troops in Macedonia enters a complaint that the Petersburg governments, one after the other, have forgotten them. Support for peace and land from the soldier in Macedonia is assured. Here is a new test of the mood of the army, this time from a far corner of southeastern Europe. And here Kamenev announces, the 10th Bicycle Battalions, summoned by the government from the front, entered Petrograd this morning, and like its predecessors, has adhered to the Congress of Soviets. The warm applause testifies that no amount of these confirmations of its power will seem excessive to the Congress. After the adoption, unanimously and without debate, of a resolution declaring it an after the adoption, unanimously and without debate, of a resolution declaring it an affair of honor of the local Soviets not to permit Jewish or any other pogroms on the part of the criminal element, a vote is taken on the draft of the land law. With 1 vote opposed and 8 abstaining, the Congress adopts with a new burst of enthusiasm the decree putting an end to serfdom, the very foundation stone of the old Russian culture. Henceforth, the agrarian revolution is legalized, and therewith the revolution of the proletariat acquires a mighty basis. A last problem remains, the creation of a government. Kamenev reads a proposal drawn up by the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks. The management of the various branches of the state life is allotted to commissions who are to carry into action the program announced by the Congress of Soviets, in close union with the mass organization of working men and women, sailors, soldiers, peasants, and clerical employees. The governmental power is concentrated in the hands of a collegium composed of the presidents of these commissions, to be called the Soviet of People's Commissars. Control over the activities of the government is vested in the Congress of Soviets and its Central Executive Committee. Once again, all the pieces are falling in place. And we have to remember, this is a much more democratic system than what we had in America. Ever. Continuing here. 7 members of the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party were nominated to the First Council of People's Commissars. Lenin as head of the government without portfolio. Rykov as People's Commissar of the Interior. Milutin as head of the Department of Agriculture. Nogin as Chief of Commerce and Industry. Trotsky as head of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Lomov of Justice. Stalin, president of a commission on the affairs of the nationalities. Military and naval affairs were allotted to a committee consisting of Antonov, Ovchinko, Krylenko, and Dybenko. The head of the Commissariat of Labor is to be Shliapnikov. The chief of the Department of Education, Lunacharsky. The heavy and ungrateful task of Minister of Provision is laid upon Theodorovich. The post and telegraph upon the worker Glebov. The position of People's Commissar of Communications is not yet allotted, the door being left open here for an agreement with the organizations of the railroad workers. All 15 candidates, 4 workers and 11 intellectuals, have behind them years of imprisonment, exile, and emigrant life. 5 of them have been imprisoned, even under the regime of the Democratic Republic. The future prime minister, even under the regime of the future prime minister had only the day before emerged from the democratic underground. Kamenev and Zinoviev did not enter the Council of People's Commissars. The former was selected for president of the new Central Executive Committee, the latter for editor of the official organ of the Soviets. As Kamenev read the list of commissars, writes Reed, there were bursts of applause after each name, Lenin's and Trotsky's especially. Sukhanov adds also that of Lunacharsky. This is beautiful. This is beautiful, man, because once again, I love an underdog story, and that's why I always root for the underdog. That's why I always support, those who have nothing, those who are dispossessed. And think about this, man. Once again, imagine you're underground, you're in prison, you're being tortured, you're exiled from the country, and then you come back and you are now one of the leaders of one of the largest countries in the world. Quite impressive, quite inspiring on so many levels. Continuing here. A long speech against the proposed staff of the government was made by a representative of the United Internationalist, Avilov, once a Bolshevik, a literator from Gorky's paper. He conscientiously enumerated the difficulties standing before the revolution in the sphere of domestic and foreign politics. We must clearly realize whither we are going before the new government stand all the old questions of bread and of peace. If it does not solve these problems, it will be overthrown. There is little grain in the country. It is in the hands of the well-to-do peasants. There is nothing to give in exchange for grain. Industry is on the decline. Fuel and raw material are lacking. To collect the grain by force is a difficult, long, and dangerous task. It is necessary, therefore, to create a government which will have the sympathy not only of the poor, but also of the well-to-do peasantry. For this, a coalition is necessary. Okay, so basically, this guy, Avilov, he's a former communist, and he's saying the Nelson Moreno argument. Oh, but we gotta have opposition parties. If we don't have opposition parties, how could we claim to be actually democratic and representative? And so I would love to jump through here and tell him, shut the fuck up. But I digress. And he's making the argument that, there's, if the people don't have opposition parties to vote for, then, they're going to eventually revolt against this government and stuff like that. And also that the Bolsheviks don't have any power to sort of implement these radical changes because everything has sort of been messed up because of the war and also the constant months of political bickering in the country. Industry is on the decline. Grain is lacking. Raw materials are lacking, everything. And so, it's going to be dangerous to try to implement a one-party state because, there's so many things that are wrong in the country. So let's make it more hard and complicated by having opposition parties. Make it make sense. All right, for this, a coalition is necessary. It will still be harder to obtain peace. The governments of the Entente will not answer the proposal of the Congress for an immediate armistice. Even without that, the Allied ambassadors are planning to leave. The new government will be isolated. Its peace initiative will be left hanging in the air. The popular masses of the warring countries are still far from revolution. The consequences may be two: either extermination of the revolution by the troops of the Hohenzollern or a separate peace. The peace terms in both cases can only be the worst possible for Russia. These difficulties can be met only by a majority of the people. The unfortunate thing is the split in the democracy. The left half wants to create a purely Bolshevik government in Smolny, and the right half is organizing in the City Duma a committee of public safety. To save the revolution, it is necessary to form a government from both groups. A representative of the left social revolutionaries, Caroline, spoke to the same effect. It is impossible to carry out the program adopted without those parties which have withdrawn from the Congress. To be sure, the Bolsheviks are not to blame for their withdrawal, but the program of the Congress ought to unite the entire democracy. We do not want to take the road of isolating the Bolsheviks, for we understand that with the fate of the Bolsheviks is bound up the fate of the whole revolution. Their ruin will be the ruin of the revolution. If they, the left social revolutionaries, have nevertheless declined the invitation to enter the government, their purpose is a good one, to keep their hands free for a mediation between the Bolsheviks and the parties which have abandoned the Congress. In such mediations, the left social revolutionaries see their principal task at the present moment. The left social revolutionaries will support the work of the new government in solving urgent problems. At the same time, they vote against the proposed governments. In a word, the young party has got mixed up as badly as it knows how. Trotsky rose to defend a government of Bolsheviks only, writes Sukhanov, himself wholly in sympathy with Avilov and having inspired Karelin behind the scenes. He was very clear, sharp, and in much absolutely right, but he refused to understand in what consisted the center of the argument of his opponents. The center of the argument consisted of an ideal diagonal. In March, they had tried to draw it between the bourgeoisie and the compromisist Soviets. Now, Sukhanov dreamed of a diagonal between the compromisist democracy and the dictatorship of the proletariat. But revolutions do not develop along diagonals. They have tried to frighten us more than once with a possible isolation of the left wing, said Trotsky. Some days back, when the question of insurrection was first openly raised, they told us that we were headed for destruction. And in reality, if you judge the grouping of forces by the political press, then insurrection threatened us with inevitable ruin. Against us stood not only the counter-revolutionary bands, but also the defensist of all varieties. The left social revolutionaries, only one wing of them, courageously worked with us in the Military Revolutionary Committee. The rest occupied a position of watchful neutrality. And nevertheless, even with these unfavorable circumstances, and when it seemed that we were abandoned by all, the insurrection triumphed. If the real forces were actually against us, how could it happen that we won the victory almost without bloodshed? No, it is not we who are isolated, but the government and the so-called Democrats. With their wavering, their compromising, they have erased themselves from the ranks of the authentic democracy. Our great superiority as a party lies in the fact that we have formed a coalition with the class forces, creating a union of the workers and the poorest peasants. Woo! Political groupings disappear, but the fundamental interests of the classes remain. The party conquers, which is able to feel out and satisfy the fundamental demands of a class. We pride ourselves upon the coalition of our garrison, chiefly composed of peasants, with the working class. This coalition has been tried by fire. The Petrograd garrison and the proletariat went hand in hand into that great struggle, which is the classic example in the history of revolutions among all peoples. Avilov has spoken of the vast difficulties which stand before us. To remove those difficulties, he proposes that we form a coalition. But he makes no attempt to lay bare his formula and tell us what coalition. A coalition of groups or classes, or simply a coalition of newspapers. They tell us the split in the democracy is a misunderstanding. When Kerensky is sending shock troops against us, when the consent of the Central Executive Committee, we are deprived of the telephone at the most critical moments of our struggle with the bourgeoisie, when they deal us blow after blow, is it possible to talk of misunderstanding? Avilov says to us, there is little bread. We must have a coalition with the defensists. Do you imagine that this coalition will increase the quantity of bread? The problem of bread is the problem of a program of action. The struggle with economic collapse demands a definite system from below and not a political grouping on top. Trotsky is spitting for anybody out there. Who says that, we need a strong opposition. Like Barack Obama said, I respect the Republican Party because America cannot work unless we have a strong opposition. And I can't help but think of the great quote from the great African leader, socialist, Kwame Nkrumah, who said about America, Americans are so privileged that they have a one-party state with two parties. And so essentially what Trotsky is saying here is that a coalition with the bourgeoisie, the same people that literally tried to send soldiers to fucking kill us, is not a true coalition. A coalition is when we get peasants and workers and people of various nationalities, of the various nationalities that comprise all of Russia, to come together under one banner, Bolshevism, and say that this country belongs to us, not to a bunch of folks in suits and sitting in air-conditioned rooms and smoking expensive cigars. The country, the land, the wealth of this nation belongs to us. Very, very, very impactful what he is saying here. What is the point of being in coalition with people if it's not going to put bread on the table? And if there is no bread in a country, that's not because the Democrats and the Republicans are not getting along. That's not what the problem is. You don't have bread because you don't have a proper system of growing food and of economic distribution. As we know right now, one of the primary reasons all of us should be communists is that we know that there is enough food in the world to feed everybody. There's enough material in the world to build a house for everybody. There's enough fresh water in the world to make sure that everybody can have access to it. It's not the amount of resources, it's the distribution of resources. And it does not matter about whether bourgeois parties at the top get along or not. I digress. Trotsky continues to spit fucking flaming bars. He says, Avalov speaks of a union with the peasantry. But again, of what peasantry is he talking? Today and right here, a representative of the peasants of Tver, Today and right here, a representative of the peasants of Tver province demanded the arrest of Avksenstiev. We must choose between this Tver peasant and Avksenstiev, who has filled the prisons with members of the peasant committees. A coalition with the kulak elements of the peasantry, we firmly reject in the name of a coalition of the working class and the poorer peasant. We are with the Tver peasants against Avksenstiev. We are with them to the end and inseparably. All right? Okay. Kareth says this is literally what Traore has advocated. When will you all get off of Traore's nuts? When will you realize Toyota pickup truck coup d'etats are not the wavy thing they are? Okay? Traore is a bastard. How do you call yourself a Marxist, Kareth, when you are literally advocating for a bourgeois African revolution? These are bourgeois revolutions, okay? And what are you going to do when Traore decides to take some money from Israel, or to, buy some weapons from Israel in the name of protecting national African sovereignty? Come on now. I'm already banned, and I probably got a hit list on me from a Burkinabe assassin. There's probably a place with a whole bunch of people on a hit list who spoke about dear leader Traore. But come on now. Your guy has no ideology. He has no framework. It's just caveman nationalism. Caveman nationalism. And selling the country to the highest bidder who just so happened doesn't have to be France or America. But the Russians can take all the gold, right? Okay, I digress. I'm not going to war with the Traore boys. Anyway, whoever now chases the shadow of coalition is totally cutting himself off from life. The social revolutionaries will lose support among the masses to the extent that they venture to oppose our party. Every group which opposes the party of the proletariat with whom the village poor have united cuts himself off from the revolution. Openly and before the face of the whole people, we raise the banner of insurrection. The political formula of this insurrection was all power to the Soviets. Through the Congress of Soviets, they tell us, we did not await the Congress with your uprising. We thought of waiting, but Kerensky would not wait. The counter-revolutionists were not dreaming. We, as a party, considered this our task, to make it genuinely possible for the Congress of Soviets to seize the power. If the Congress had been surrounded with Junkers, how could it have seized the power? In order to achieve this task, a party was needed, which would wrench the power from the hands of the counter-revolution and say to you, here is the power, and you've got to take it. Stormy and prolonged applause. Notwithstanding that the defensist of all shades stopped at nothing in their struggle against us, we did not throw them out. We proposed to the Congress as a whole to take the power. How utterly you distort the perspective when, after all that has happened, you talk from this tribune of our irreconcilability. When a party surrounded with a cloud of gunpowder smoke comes up to them and says, "Let us take the power together," they run to the city Duma and unite there with open counter-revolutionists. They are traitors to the revolution, with whom we shall never unite. For the struggle for peace, says Avalov, we must make a coalition with the compromisers. At the same time, he acknowledges that the Allies do not want to make peace. The Allied imperialists laughed, says Avalov, at the oleomargin delegate, Skobelev. I've never heard this word, oleomargin. I got to look that up. The Allied imperialists laughed, says Avalov, at the oleomargin delegate Skobelev. Nevertheless, if you form a bloc with the oleomargin Democrats, the cause of peace is assured. What is oleomargin? That is a wild word. Oleomargin. Margarine? What does this mean? Oleomargin is the original form or term for margarine. Okay, this is a Russian phrase. This is a Russian phrase that I can't understand. The butter Marxist is hated, but the buttered liberal Democrats are assured success if you're in coalition with them. Like the butter substitute, yeah. It says here, oleomargarine is the original term for margarine. Okay. All right, I guess. Anyway. All right. Kareth is just now throwing shade. Kareth, just say it with your chest. Whatever you're trying to say. Western Marxists love dead Marxists. I love all actual Marxists. Your guy Traore is not a Marxist. He's a guy who knows how to drive a Toyota pickup truck and stay cool under 40-degree temperature while wearing three layers of military clothing. Okay? Your guy Traore is a musty, bourgeois, African dictator. No different than Idi Amin. Okay? Your guy there is no different than Sisi in Egypt. Okay? Your guy is a musty, African warlord. That's what he is. He is not a socialist. He is not coming from the perspective of trying to have liberation against imperialism and white supremacy and capitalism. If he is, all he's trying to do is just put down paved roads in the street and sell gold to Russia and let white supremacist Russians on the name of the Wagner Group come to Burkina Faso and just spray entire villages because it's a fun way to kill black people. If that's your guy, fuck your guy. Period. So Western Marxists love dead Marxists. You can try to throw that shot at me, but I'm keeping it absolutely real with you. Ibrahim Traore and all people like that are nothing more than just sellouts. They're sellouts. They're no different than the African warlords we saw all throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He is a musty CC. He is a musty Idi Amin. And that nigga needs to change his fucking clothes. Wearing the same fucking shit every day. In 40-degree weather in the Sahel. He must be out of his fucking mind. Imagine the smell. Imagine the fucking smell. Never read a book in his life, but knows how to load up and put together an M16. Come on now. Get the fuck out of here. All right. So, I think it was an example and not necessarily a claim. Exactly, man. Would you be surprised, though? Okay. All right. Traore, Nkrumah called himself a socialist because he wrote a book about African socialism. Lumumba, to some degree, we don't claim him in the fold of socialism because he was a bourgeois. He was bourgeois. Let's keep it real. Lumumba is bourgeois. Okay? Patrice Lumumba was a bourgeois trying to seize power. He was just he was a guy at the right place at the right time. He was one of like 5 people in Congo who had like a college degree. Okay? Kareth, you can't be keeping it real too when you're just throwing little shots like that. If you throw shade, that's not That's not masculine. We are masculine Marxists over here. We say it with our chest. And I know I'm the one with the microphone, but you got enough time to type it out. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, Lemony is trying to decipher the weird Russian pun that Trotsky used when he said that Skobelev was oleomargin. I guess Marxism equals butter, reformers equal fake butter, I guess. I don't know. It's real silly. Okay. Okay. Harvester says Marx was the least masculine man who ever existed. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I don't care. Okay. How do you know he never read? Okay. Come on now. Come on now. Okay. Okay. Karen. How do I know? Because we've listened to him speak. Do you think Trump has read a book? Do you think Trump has read a book? Do we really think that? And by read a book, I don't mean literally he has never read one book, but that he's actually well read. He's actually versed. He's actually gave his mind some time to think and ponder over some shit and reflect over some shit. Lumumba was bourgeois. Yes, Lumumba was bourgeois. Just because you're anti-colonial does not make you bourgeois. Sure, you want the Belgians out, but what class of people do you represent? What class of people do you represent? I digress. All right, Trotsky continues here. There are two roads in the struggle for peace. One road is to oppose the allied and enemy governments, the moral and material force of the revolution. The other is a bloc with Skobelev, which means a bloc with Tereshchenko in complete subjection to allied imperialism. In our proclamation on peace, we address ourselves simultaneously to the governments and the peoples. That is purely formal symmetry. Of course, we do not think to influence the imperialist governments with our proclamations. Although as long as they exist, we cannot ignore them. We rest all our hope on the possibility that our revolution will unleash the European revolution. If the revolting peoples of Europe do not crush imperialism, then we will be crushed. That is indubitable. Either the Russian Revolution will raise the whirlwind of struggle in the West, or the capitalists of all countries will crush our revolution. There is a third road, says a voice from the benches. The third road, answers Trotsky, is the road of the Central Executive Committee. On the one hand, sending delegates to the West European workers, and on the other, forming a union with the Kishkins and Konovalovs. That is a road of lies and hypocrisy which we will never enter. Okay? So, of course, we do not say that the only day of insurrection of the European workers will be the day that the peace treaty is signed. This also is possible, that the bourgeoisie, frightened by an approaching insurrection of the oppressed, will hasten to make peace. The dates are not set. The concrete forms cannot be foretold. It is important and it is necessary to define the method of struggle, a method identical in both principle in foreign and domestic politics, a union of the oppressed here and everywhere. That is our road. Very interesting what Trotsky is saying here. He's saying like, yo, we are putting forward our revolution and exiting out this war and sending out delegates to different parts of Russia to let them know that we're out of the war, and also as a signal to the workers in England, France, and Germany that now is their time to seize their country. You get what I'm saying? Very, very powerful what he's saying here. And he says that we will not, form a union with Kishkins and Konolovs, basically reformers, monarchists, at worst fascists, outright fascists who want military dictatorship. We're not going to form a coalition with those people. We are here to advocate for a coalition of the different classes of Russia, which are the working class and the peasantry, meant to oppress the minority bourgeoisie to make sure they never gain power again. Okay? All right. So, okay, let's go here. I'm going to go to Lemony Fresh Pine. I don't take the opinions on Marx from people who have never read Marx. Facts. You could ignore those people, or you could debate them in the chat. Maybe you could educate them on their ignorance. Lemony Fresh Pine. Shout out to Hexed. He says, down with imperialism. Absolutely. We need to end imperialism. And the first thing that Lenin said when he took the stand at the Congress of Soviets in Smolny, he said, we're going to construct socialism now. And the first thing we're doing is ending imperialism. We're not going to be a white supremacist imperial country. And yes, Russia was a white supremacist imperial country. When he says the great Russians were oppressing the, Kazakhs or the Caucasus people and the other people in the Altai region, et cetera, et cetera. He's essentially talking about white Russians oppressing, non-white peoples, essentially. So yes, Russia was a white supremacist imperialist nation, and yet and still, the largest white supremacist imperialist nation was defeated from the inside. So once again, we are reading this book for hope that we can do the same thing in our own country. If you're 35 like me, we can do the same thing. We've witnessed our country murder brown people across the world and continue to murder them, and even start to prop up people who were explicit murderers of brown people. All right. So let's continue here. All right. And Lemony Fresh Pine is doing good work, fighting against the fascists in the chat. But once again, I think what Harvester doesn't understand is that us leftists are not like right-wing fascists who worship at the altar of Donald Trump. Anything Donald Trump says is absolutely right, and anything any other right-wing fascist says is absolutely right and needs to be defended. I've said before on this live stream that I don't trust a Marxist or a communist that doesn't have a criticism of Marx. One of my biggest criticism of Marx is his blind spot when he talks about the labor conflicts and doesn't talk about the slave uprisings and where slaveocracy needs to be challenged. You get what I'm saying? So I've always been critical of Marx. But we are thinkers on this side. We are thinkers and revolutionaries. Meanwhile, on the right-wing side where Harvester lives, they are cocksuckers. They are big cocksuckers. Any man that comes to them and tells them to be afraid of trans people, of gay people, of communists, they just automatically get down on their knees and start sucking the cock of that man. Because fascists are naturally beta bitches. They're naturally beta boys. They're more afraid of challenging billionaires and capital interests and the police state and the military. You know what I mean? They're more afraid of that. So what they do is pick on people that are smaller than them. They pick on racial minorities, ethnic minorities, political minorities as well. He's a total bitch. He's a total bitch. He's the type of man that would sit in the chair in the hotel while I fuck his wife. Okay? So that's all we got to say. That's all we got to say. All right. Continuing here. All right. So, of course, we do not say that the only day of insurrection of the European workers will be the day that the peace treaty is signed. This also is possible, that the bourgeoisie, frightened by an approaching insurrection of the oppressed, will hasten to make peace. The dates are not set. The concrete forms cannot be foretold. It is important that it is necessary to define the method of struggle, a method identical in principle both in foreign and domestic politics, a union of the oppressed here and everywhere. That is our road. The delegates of the Congress, says John Reed, greeted him with an immense crusading acclaim, kindling to the daring of it with the thoughts of championing mankind. At any rate, it could not have entered the minds of any Bolshevik at that time to protest against placing the fate of the Soviet Republic in an official speech in the name of the Bolshevik Party, in direct dependence upon the development of the international revolution. The dramatic law of this Congress was that each significant act was concluded or even interrupted by a short intermission during which a figure from the other camp would suddenly appear under the stage and voice a protest or a threat or present an ultimatum. A representative of the VIXEL, the executive committee of the Railroad Workers Union, now demanded the floor immediately and on the instant. He must throw a bomb into the assembly before the vote was taken on the question of power. The speaker, in whose face Reed saw implacable hostility, began with an accusation. His organization, the strongest in Russia, had not been invited to the Congress. It was the Central Executive Committee that did not invite you. He was shouted at from all sides. But he continued, and be it known that the original decision of the VIXEL to support the Congress of Soviets has been revoked. The speaker hastened to read an ultimatum, already distributed by telegraph throughout the country. The VIXEL condemns the seizure of power by one party. The government ought to be responsible before the entire revolutionary democracy. Until the creation of a democratic government, only the VIXEL will control railroad lines. The speaker adds that the counter-revolutionary troops will not be admitted to Petrograd. But in general, the movement troops will henceforth take place only at the direction of the old Central Executive Committee. In case of repressions directed against the railroad workers, the VIXEL will deprive Petrograd of food. So here comes these, once again, another element of counter-revolution Trotsky brings up. And these are counter-revolutionary union leaders. And so basically these railroad union bosses are saying, hey, you guys are going to start forming a one-party state that's trying to dictate the proletariat's demands. We're going to shut down the railroads and we're not going to bring you food. Okay, so very interesting. Very interesting. This, just being in a union, just being a union boss doesn't automatically make you a good guy. I forgot the name of the guy, but there was a major union boss. I believe he was from the AFL-CIO, the union leader of the largest union in America during the 2020 campaign, endorsed Donald Trump, the most anti-union president of all time. And how could you be a Republican in the right to work party? The party that wants to crush all unions throughout America, particularly in the South, where many people are moving to, and I don't understand why. Okay, all right. Anyway, okay, let's continue here. The Congress bristled under the blow. The chiefs of the railroad union were trying to converse with the representatives of the people as one government with another. When the workers, soldiers, and peasants take the administration of the state into their hands, the Vikzell presumes to give commands to the workers, soldiers, and peasants. It wants to change into petty cash the overthrown system of dual power, and thus attempting to rely not upon its numbers, but upon the exceptional significance of railroads in the economy and culture of the country. These Democrats of the Vikzell expose the whole frailty of the criterion of formal democracy upon the fundamental issues of a social struggle. Truly, revolution has a genius for education. Very interesting. So what Trotsky is saying here is that them threatening to shut off Petrograd with food and grain and water and what else, because trains are so essential to the city's survival, exposes that, life is not just about democracy and like who you vote for and who represents you. Life is about who actually controls the material wealth, the material interest, the means of production. Who controls the means of production. And so, yeah, Trotsky's saying like this exposure right here just breaks open any notion that, power is only in the hands of the people. No, power is in the hands of a small elite clique that controls the railroads, controls the oil fields, controls the gas pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. All right. All right. So Laser says, do you know Haas? We don't rock with Haas on this channel. That man is literally insane. I'm not going to go into a back and forth with any Haas supporters. I'm a member of the CPUSA, not the ACP. So no. I don't rock with Haas. There's nothing here, American Communist Party, none of that. And Harvester is just being ridiculous with the conspiracy theories here. This man just wants to argue with the wall. He wants to just argue with the wall. He's just, his brain has been 4chanified. That man's brain has been fried and 4chanified, hasn't it? Hey, thanks, Lemony Pine, for tackling that idiot. He's really dumb. Karen says, who is Haz? Haz is a Lebanese, Shia, Muslim, second-generation American who started a communist party called the American Communist Party, which is essentially reactionary in the sense that, they don't recognize the aspects of racism, white supremacy, and imperialism that are a part of capitalism. They just want a sort of class-first basis for tackling communism. And also they're followers of a guy named, there was like this guy who formed a cult around himself in America. He was like a left-wing Trotskyist in America. I believe his name was LaRouche or something like that. And so he also falls in that trend of Western American, socialism. So yeah, it's just all a big mix of fucked up shit that they believe in. They generally are like pro-Trump communist. Pro-Trump communists, very nationalistic, therefore, kicking out all the immigrants and stuff like that. Lyndon LaRouche, I believe his name was. Yes, says Gareth, yeah. Okay. All right. All right. All right. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. Oh my God, Lemony is just going off on Harvester. It's hilarious. It's hilarious. Okay. Yeah. At any moment, the moment for this blow was not badly chosen by the compromisers. The faces of the Presidium were troubled. Fortunately, the VIXL was by no means unconditional boss on the railroads. In the local districts, the railroad workers were members of the city Soviets. Even here at the Congress, the ultimatum of the VIXL met resistance. The whole mass of the railroad workers of our district, said the delegate from Tashkent, have expressed themselves in favor of the transfer of power to the Soviets. Another delegate from railroad workers declared the VIXL a political corpse. That doubtless was exaggerated. Relying upon the rather numerous upper layers of railroad clerks, the VIXL had preserved more life force than the other higher-up organizations of the compromisers. But it belonged indubitably to the same type as the Army committees or the Central Executive Committee. Its star was swiftly falling. The workers were everywhere distinguishing themselves from the clerical employees. The lower clerks were opposing themselves to the higher. The impudent ultimatum of the VIXL would undoubtedly hasten these processes. No, the station masters can't hold back the locomotive of the October Revolution. Very interesting what Trotsky, he's saying here. Very interesting. He's saying that, these union bosses who's saying that they're speaking for the people don't really run the people. And the people who work on the railroad say, no, we actually like the Bolsheviks. We like the Soviet. We're going to continue to bring food and grain to them. There can be no questioning the legal rights of this Congress, declared Kamenev with authority. The quorum of the Congress was established not by us, but by the old Central Executive Committee. The Congress is the highest organ of the workers and soldier masses. A simple return to the order of the day. The Council of People's Commissars was ratified by an overwhelming majority. Avalov's resolution, according to the excessively generous estimate of Sukhanov, got 150 votes, chiefly left social revolutionaries. The Congress then unanimously confirmed the membership of the new Central Executive Committee out of 101 members, 62 Bolsheviks, 29 left social revolutionaries. The Central Executive Committee was to complete itself in the future with representatives of the peasant Soviets and the re-elected army organizations. The factions who had abandoned the Congress were granted the right to send their delegates to the Central Executive Committee on the basis of proportional representation. Very interesting. So they're forming the first, Congress of Soviets, the Central Executive Committee, all of that. And it's made up of two parties. So look, we found a compromise, guys. It's mostly Bolsheviks. We have 62 hardcore Bolshevik communists. And in a compromise to you people out there who say that we shouldn't have just one-party states, we got far left-wing socialists from the SRs. Does that make you happy? Is that a happy compromise? We got, two groups of people with different names, but they agree on the same thing. It's very similar to our current timeline now. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, and they essentially agree that your landlord should be able to fuck you, that your boss should be able to fuck you. So yeah, we have two parties now. We have the left, far left social revolutionaries, and we have the radical communists. Are you happy? Are you happy now that we have coalition parties? For all my people out there that don't like one-party states, here we go. Anyway, we're coming on the end of this chapter. We are finishing chapter 46, and then we will read the conclusion, which is only 3 pages. As we near the end, if you have any comments or questions for me, or anything that you want me to read out and interact with, write Comrade Simon, first line, and then I'll, react to that, okay? So that way we can get to the end of this. We still have about, 20, 30 more minutes to go. So we have 2 more paragraphs here in chapter 46, 3 pages in the conclusion, and then that's the end. The agenda of the Congress was completed. The Soviet government was created. It had its program. The work could begin, and there was no lack of it. At 5:15 in the morning, Kamenev closed the Constituent Congress of the Soviet regime. To the stations, home, to the front, to the factories and the barracks, to the mines of the far-off villages. And the decrees of the Soviet, the delegates will carry the levin of the proletarian revolution to all corners of the country. On that morning, the central organ of the Bolshevik Party, again under the old name Pravda, wrote, "They wanted us to take the power alone. so that we alone should have to contend with the terrible difficulties confronting the country. So be it. We take the power alone, relying upon the voice of the country and counting upon the friendly help of the European proletariat. But having taken the power, we will deal with the enemies of revolution and its saboteurs with an iron hand. They dreamed of a dictatorship of Kornilov. We will give them a dictatorship of the proletariat. Beautiful words. Let's go back to the beautiful words of our trans, black, communist leader, Lenin. Let's go back. We should make sure we memorize this in our minds and our hearts. When Lenin stood up in the Provisional Soviet Congress, what did he say? We are now doing the work of building socialism. Where is it? Where is it? Okay, that's when they started singing the International. Okay, immeasurable significance. This is when Lenin starts reading from the speech that he wrote with his long nails. Okay. All right. We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order. I'm going to save that. I'm going to save that. In fact, I'm going to make that a post on my channel right now. We shall now proceed. We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order. Yes, that is the play. We shall now proceed to construct the socialist order. I love that quote. I don't know why. Because I like victory. You know what I'm saying? I like niggas who win. You know what I mean? And that's one thing. Like, the thing is, I like underdogs and I also like winners. You know what I'm saying? I like winners and underdogs. And one of the reasons I'm a communist is that I do believe that, you know, the working class people, the poor, the dispossessed, the oppressed of the planet Earth do deserve everything in the world because they're the backbone of our modern world. Whether it be the child in the Congo digging out the mine, digging in a mine for the material to make the cell phone I'm talking to you on right now, or whether it be, you know, English teachers like me, whether it be doctors, nurses, street sweepers, garbage men, you know, bricklayers, construction workers, garbage men, all the people, man. The poor and the dispossessed of the earth deserve more than what they get right now. And that's why, you know, I'm a socialist. So they're underdogs, but they're also winners too. They're also winners because there's so much history to be drawn from where communists and the working people straight up kicked ass. You know what I'm saying? Very similar to why I became a Muslim. I became a Muslim because, you know, Muhammad wasn't a pussy ass bitch like Jesus. You know what I mean? Astaghfirullah. You know, because Isa is one of our prophets. But, you know, Muhammad wasn't hanging off a cross talking about, oh, my father, why did you fucking forsake me? Oh, daddy, why did you leave me here hanging? You know what I mean? Muhammad was a badass. Muhammad, you know, came back to Mecca and stood on the Kaaba like what? You know what I'm saying? What is black homie right there? You know what I'm saying? Defeated racism, defeated clanism, you know what I'm saying? Defeated all types of ignorance. You know what I'm saying? That's why, you know, I like underdogs and I like winners. And reading this story made me see so many winners in underdogs. You get what I'm saying? It's a, you know, it's a Hollywood blockbuster. You know what I mean? Somebody screenplay this and make this into a mega blockbuster movie. Okay? Who could play Lenin? You know who could play a good Lenin? The guy who was in Jurassic Park. Who was in the first Jurassic Park? First Jurassic Park cast. Who was the guy that played the doctor? Jeff Goldblum. You know who could play Trotsky in the movie? Jeff Goldblum. Somebody write that script and send it to Jeff Goldblum. I could see him playing a fabulous Trotsky. You know what I'm saying? Not that we're begging for bourgeois representation and bastardization of these working class victories and stories, but I'm just saying. Anyway, we're jumping now to the conclusion. These are 3 final pages that we are reading of this text, and then this will be the end of the live stream. I will give out final thank yous and shout outs at the end. Final 3 pages coming right here, right now. Conclusion. A remarkable consecutiveness of stages is to be observed in the development of the Russian Revolution, and this for the very reason that it was an authentic popular revolution, setting in motion tens of millions. Events succeeded, each one as though obeying laws of gravitation. The correlation of forces was twice verified at every stage. First, the masses would demonstrate the might of their assault. Then the possessing classes attempting revenge would reveal their isolation the more clearly. In February, the workers and soldiers of Petrograd rose in insurrection, not only against the patriotic will of all the educated classes, but also contrary to the reckonings of the revolutionary organizations. The masses demonstrated that they were unconquerable. Had they themselves been aware of this, they would have become the government. But there was not yet a strong and authoritative revolutionary party at their head. The power fell into the hands of the petty bourgeois democracy tinted with a protective socialist coloration. The Mensheviks and social revolutionaries could make no other use of the confidence of the masses but to summon to the helm the liberal bourgeoisie, who in this turn could only place the power slipped to them by the compromisers at the service of the interest of the Entente. In the April days, the indignation of the regiments and factories, again, without the summons of any party, brought them out on the streets of Petrograd to resist the imperialist policy of the government wished on them by the compromisers. This armed demonstration attained an appearance of success. Milikov, the leader of Russian imperialism, was removed from the government. The compromisers entered the government, superficially as plenipotentiaries of the people, in reality as callboys of the bourgeoisie. Without having decided one of the problems which had evoked the revolution, the coalition government violated in June the de facto armistice that had been established on the front, throwing the troops into an offensive. By this act, the February regime, already marked by the declining thrust of the masses and the compromisers, dealt itself a fatal blow. The period, opened a direct preparation for the second revolution. At the beginning of July, the government, having all the possessing and educated classes behind it, was prosecuting every revolutionary manifestation, whatever, as treason to the fatherland and aid to the enemy. The official mass organizations, the Soviets, the social patriotic parties, were struggling against a coming out with all their power. The Bolsheviks, for tactical reasons, were trying to restrain the workers and soldiers from coming into the streets. Nevertheless, the masses came out. The movement proved unrestrainable and universal. The government was nowhere to be seen. The compromisers hid. The workers and soldiers proved masters of the situation in the capital. Their offensive went to pieces, however, owing to the inadequate readiness of the provinces and the front. Okay? At the end of August, all the organs and institutions of the possessing classes stood for a counter-revolutionary overturn. The diplomats of the Entente, the banks, the leagues of landed proprietors and industrialists, the cadet party, the staffs, the officers, the big press, the organizer of the overturn was no other than the supreme commander-in-chief with the officer apparatus of an army of millions to rely on. Military detachments, specially selected from all fronts, were thrown against Petrograd under pretense of strategic considerations and by secret agreement with the head of the government. In the capital, everything, it seemed, was prepared for the success of the enterprise. The workers had been disarmed by the authorities with the help of the compromisers. The Bolsheviks were under a steady rain of blows. The more revolutionary regiments had been removed from the city. Hundreds of specially selected officers were concentrated in shock brigades. With the officer schools and Cossack detachments, they should constitute an impressive force. And what happened? The plot, patronized, it would seem, by the gods themselves, barely came in contact with the revolutionary people. It scattered in dust. These two movements, at the beginning of July and the end of August, relate to each other as a theorem and its converse. The July days demonstrated the might of the self-dependent movement of the masses. The August days laid bare the complete impotence of the ruling groups. This correlation signalized the inevitability of a new conflict. The provinces and the front were meanwhile drawing closer to the capital. This predetermined the October victory. The ease with which Lenin and Trotsky overthrew the last coalition government of Kerensky, wrote the Cadet Nabokov, revealed its inward impotence. The degree of this impotence was an amazement at that time, even to well-informed people. Nabokov himself seems hardly aware that it was a question of his impotence, that of his class, of his social structure. Just as, from the armed demonstration of July, the curve rises to the October insurrection, so the movement of Kornilov seems a dress rehearsal of the counter-revolutionary campaign undertaken by Kerensky in the last days of October. The sole military force against the Bolsheviks found out at that front by the Democratic commander-in-chief after his flight under cover of the little American flag was that same 3rd Cavalry Corps which 2 months before had been designated by Kornilov for the overthrow of Kerensky himself. The commander of the Corps was still the Cossack general, Krasnov, militant monarchist placed in this post by Kornilov. A more appropriate commander for the defense of democracy was not to be found. Moreover, nothing was left of the Corps but its name. It had been reduced to a few Cossack squadrons, who after an unsuccessful attempt to take the offensive against the Reds near Petrograd, fraternized with the revolutionary sailors and turned Krasnov over to the Bolsheviks. Kerensky was obliged to take flight both from the Cossacks and the sailors. Thus, 8 months after the overthrow of the monarchy, the workers stood at the head of the country, and they stood firmly. Beautiful, beautiful right here. Gonna go to the comments real quick. Carrot says, I will close by saying that Traore was always wearing fatigues. It's much like Sankara and Castro dig. That is self-imposed abstemiousness to remind themselves from falling into self-aggrandizement. I understand, but it's not about what clothes you wear. I'm dressed like a bourgeois, liberal, black-ass preacher. I'm dressed like right now I'm about to tell you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Or I'm dressed like I'm legal counsel to Benjamin Crump. You know, we're going to shake down these white folks and get some money for killing black folks. Like, I'm dressed like that. I'm dressed like I'm Al Sharpton's personal assistant. Like I'm trying to get an internship at Rainbow Push. You know what I mean? I'm dressed like that. But I have the heart of Che Guevara, the heart of Malcolm X, the heart of Huey P. and Bobby Seale, the heart of Asada. So it's not about what you wear, okay? And I know that's not the point you're making. I'm just saying that nigga's musty. Ibrahim Traore is a musty bastard. He's a musty bastard who's leading a bourgeois revolution, not actually trying to do anything good for his people. Okay, he's just leading them down the road to let Burkinabes become hunting items for rich French people. I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if Ibrahim Traore starts doing a little dangerous game activity. You know, if they start legalizing Russian white people who, you know, want to do some paramilitary activities to shoot innocent people in Burkina Faso. And this is not new. If you know, they used to, rich Italians and rich French people used to go to Bosnia to shoot people in Sarajevo. Look this up. This is a fact. Human hunting has been happening for a long ass time. And it's been a very profitable thing too. Pay $40,000, $50,000 to go hunt some people. This has happened before. In Bosnia, there are credible reports of French, Italians, and other rich people from around the world, you know, hanging out with the Serbian military, shooting down at people in the besieged city of Sarajevo. And so, yeah, I would not be surprised if that starts popping off in Burkina Faso. Ibrahim Traore is a musty bourgeois bastard who just led a Toyota pickup coup. And y'all are calling him Sankara 2.0? No. The nigga's uneducated, unprincipled, undisciplined, and just bourgeois nationalist, chauvinist bullshit, okay? All right? Yeah, anyway, what Trotsky is laying down here is very interesting. As a sociologist in training, I disagree with Trotsky's contentions that revolutions are scientific in a way. In a sense, I do agree with the idea of historical materialism and dialectical materialism in the sense that opposing forces meet, counteract, and one sublimates the other, and then something new is born, etc. If you want to look at the revolution like that, then yes, You know what I'm saying? But a revolution is not scientific in the sense that it is replicable. Anything scientific has to be replicable, challengeable, so that we can constantly test it against the scientific method. But revolutions are once in a lifetime type of thing. We can't replicate exactly the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Paris Commune, the Haitian Revolution, the American Revolution, right? None of these can be perfectly replicable because there are people acting in a specific moment in time. But we can take inspiration from them, and we can see and highlight that many of the parallels of their society and time also exist in our society and time. Many of the contradictions of their time exist in our time, primarily the primary one between capitalism and the people that work under capitalism. So yeah, Trotsky's just relaying the events of the months between February and October and how they overcame so much. So it's sort of like he's just summarizing everything we've read so far. Okay? All right. All right. Kareth says he loved this journey, learned a lot. Lemony Fresh Pies dropping mad 100s. I appreciate that. I would like to know what y'all learned, what y'all gained from any of the episodes of us reading this book. We still have one more. We have 2 more pages to go. Sorry. Okay, we have 2 more pages to go. So, who would believe it? They had to believe it. It was impossible not to believe it. When ensigns routed the generals, when burgomasters from the ranks of common labor put down the resistance of yesterday's lords, train oilers regulated transport, and locksmiths as directors revived industry. The chief task of a political regime, according to an English aphorism, is to put the right people in the right positions. How does the experiment of 1917 look from this point of view? During the first 2 months, Russia was ruled through right of monarchic succession by a man inadequately endowed by nature who believed in saints, mummies, and submitted to Rasputin. During the next 8 months, the liberals and Democrats attempted from their governmental high places to prove to the people that the revolution had been accomplished in order that all should remain as before. No wonder those people passed over the country like a wavering shadows, leaving no trace. From the 25th of October, the man at the head of Russia was Lenin, the greatest figure in Russian political history. He was surrounded by a staff of assistants who, as their most spiteful enemies acknowledged, knew what they wanted and how to fight for their aims. Which of these 3 systems, in the given concrete conditions, proved capable of putting the right people in the right positions? The historic ascent of humanity, taken as a whole, may be summarized as a succession of victories of consciousness over blind forces. I repeat, the historic ascent of humanity, taken as a whole, may be summarized as a succession of victories of consciousness over blind forces. In nature, in society, in man himself. Critical and creative thought can boast of its greatest victories up to now in the struggle with nature. The physico-chemical sciences have already reached a point where man is clearly about to become a master of matter. But social relations are still forming in the manner of the Coral Islands. Parliamentarism illumined only the surface of society, and even that with a rather artificial light. And by the surface of society, I think Trotsky means the upper crust. When you create a democracy, essentially what you're creating is more room for the upper crust of society to have say over that society. Okay, In comparison with monarchy and other heirlooms from the cannibals and cave dwellers, democracy is, of course, a great conquest, but it leaves the blind play of forces in the social relations of men untouched. It was against this deeper sphere of the unconscious that the October Revolution was the first to raise its hand. The Soviet system wishes to bring aim and plan into the very basis of society, where up to now only accumulated consequences have reigned. Enemies are gleeful that 15 years after the revolution, the Soviet country is still but little like a kingdom of universal well-being. Such an argument, if not really to be explained as due to blinding hostility, could only be dictated by an excessive worship of the magic power of socialist methods. Capitalism required 100 years to elevate science and techniques to the heights and plunge humanity into the hell of war and crisis. To socialism, its enemies allow only 15 years to create and finish a terrestrial paradise. We took no such obligation upon ourselves. We never set these dates. The process of vast transformations must be measured by an adequate scale. Very, very interesting what Trotsky is saying here. He's saying, like, it's been 50 years since the Bolsheviks came to power, and people are saying, look at that, socialism failed. Can't you tell? Communism doesn't work because it's been 15 years since the Bolsheviks. So this is the thing. When people like Harvester or other anti-communists jump in and they say communism never worked, they were literally saying that right at the time when they were trying to build socialism. And never mind the fact that from the very beginning, as we have read in this book multiple times, the Western powers were fiddling and fucking up and fudging around in pre-revolutionary Russia or pre-Soviet Russia. Literally, the Americans tried to reinstall Kerensky, had him riding around in a car with an American flag. You get what I'm saying? So, it's very interesting that, the same criticisms that we have seen in our present day were used and thrown out during Trotsky's time as well, showing once again that, right-wingers are never going to advance their line of thinking. Somebody who's an ardent anti-communist is going to die an anti-communist. We're not here to convince right-wingers. We're here to wake up the minds of the working people and organize them as well. Okay? Anyway, final page. But the misfortunes which have overwhelmed living people, the fire and bloodshed of the Civil War, do the consequences of a revolution justify in general the sacrifices it involves? The question is teleological and therefore fruitless. It will be as well to ask in face of the difficulties and griefs of personal existence. Is it worthwhile to be born? Melancholy reflections have not so far, however, prevented people from bearing or being born. Even in the present epoch of intolerable misfortune, only a small percentage of the population of our planet resorts to suicide. But the people are seeking the way out of their unbearable difficulties in revolution. It is remarkable that those who talk most indignantly about the victims of social revolutions are usually the very ones who, if not directly responsible for the victims of the World War, prepared and glorified them, or at least accepted them. Damn! It is our turn to ask, did the war justify itself? What has it given us? What has it taught? So once again, one of the main arguments people throw against communists is that, the Soviet Union was so bad, so many people died. Don't you realize that so many people died in the name of Soviet, whether it be the Great Purge or the Russian Civil War or the gulags or the blah, 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 blah. But Trotsky is saying it right here. Trotsky said it right here, even in his own time. It's remarkable that those who talk indignantly about the victims of our revolution are usually the very ones who are happy. In fact, they were responsible for World War I, one of the most useless, bloody wars of all time, where millions of people were gunned down in machine gun fire and died from toxic gas. But they never say anything about the capitalist countries that waged the war, technically against their own working class. Because then the rich folks weren't out there fighting. The rich politicians that sent the people out there to fight weren't out there fighting. It's always poor working class people that die on the front line. So very interesting what Trotsky's laying out here. For anybody who says the communists killed so many people. Nigga, how many people died during World War I? How many people died during World War II? When we were fighting fascists, and how many communists died fighting against fascism? Anyway, Lemony says it's also extremely disrespectful to those who died as revolutionaries. Each of them was willing to die for a better future. Absolutely true. So yeah, these arguments that we are dealing with now that seem to be incessant were also arguments that even literally Leon Trotsky himself and Lenin himself were dealing with. Anyway, all right. It will hardly pay now to pause upon the assertions of injured Russian proprietors that the revolution led to the cultural decline of the country. That aristocratic culture overthrown by the October Revolution was in the last analysis only a superficial imitation of higher Western models. Remaining inaccessible to the Russian people, it added nothing essential to the treasure store of humanity. The October Revolution laid the foundation for a new culture, taking everybody into consideration. And for that very reason, immediately acquired acquiring international significance, even supposing for a moment that owing to unfavorable circumstances and hostile blows, the Soviet regime should be temporarily overthrown, the inexpugnable impress of the October Revolution would nevertheless remain upon the whole future development of mankind. Very interesting. So Trotsky is saying here that, it's very interesting how we think about culture, because I guess back then at the beginning of the 20th century, people thought culture was made by people who were cultured, sophisticated, bourgeoisie. And I guess that would make sense because you would need a lot of free time to be able to write a great novel or compose a great symphony. And those people usually were landlords or, business owners. You get what I'm saying? And so, the people that did write those books or symphonies were patronized by people who were rich, successful business owners as well. And so one of the criticisms of the October Revolution, the Soviet takeover, is that, oh, you killed Russian culture. Well, Trotsky replies, no, our culture now is not just rich people writing crazy books about their melodramatic lives. It's actually now all of the people of Russia who are included, and that's more impactful than just a few rich people's books and symphonies. Very interesting. This is the final paragraph of the book right here. I promise you. You can see it right here. The language of the civilized nations has clearly marked off two epochs in the development of Russia, where the aristocratic culture introduced into world parlance such as barbarisms as czar, pogrom, Knaut. October has internationalized such words as Bolshevik, Soviet, and Piatletka. This alone justifies the proletarian revolution, if you imagine that it needs justification. So essentially, what Trotsky is saying here is that the old Russia, the culture, and what it will be remembered by is barbarism, killing mass amounts of Jewish people, a czar ruling over an empire where he sends hundreds of thousands of men to die on the front line with the move of his pinky. Landlords exploiting the people. Okay? That's what the Russian Revolution will be remembered by. Meanwhile, the October, that's what Tsarist Russia will be remembered by. The October Revolution internationalized Soviets, basically workers' councils, Bolsheviks, those who, fight for a better world, and communism in general. The idea that we can have a society from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs, and no exploitation, no worker exploitation. Absolutely a great way to end it. That is the end of the book. That's the end. That's the end of the history of the Russian Revolution. We made it. We made it to the end. Are y'all happy? I started this journey because my guy Kareth suggested that I read a fictionalized book about the history of the Russian Revolution. And now here we are, just reading one of the most profound books. And, I've learned so much from this. I guess my three main takeaways are that liberal is now a slur. I will now call people liberal with the hard L, like a loogie. You know what I'm saying? Nobody likes a compromiser. Don't compromise on your belief. Be hardline, and there's no problem with being in the minority. Okay, that's another thing. Us socialists and leftists need to learn proper propaganda to soldiers and police. That's something else I've learned. Working class struggle is real, and collaboration with the rural folks is very important too. Rural people are just as revolutionary, even though they might seem a bit backward. Another thing is that I learned about the separation of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism, at least, like Lenin's great contribution. Lenin's great contribution, at least from reading this, is that we don't need a bourgeois revolution to start building socialism. So we don't have to go through the step-by-step stages that Marx laid out. If the opportunity is there, the working class, the proletariat, should straight up jump at the opportunity to create the dictatorship of the proletariat. I learned a lot about the Russian Revolution in the sense that beforehand, before reading this book, I really thought, you know, in that the Russian Revolution was maybe a popular mass uprising, but it was more hard fought in the sense that it was more shooting guns and like, you know, throwing grenades and fighting people in the street and shit like that. And it wasn't like that at all. It was a lot of propaganda. It was a lot of the Bolsheviks not knowing their way. I was really surprised by how Trotsky lays out the story and how the Bolsheviks in a lot of the chapters didn't know what the fuck to do. And were sometimes at the opposite ends of the people. And it's not because they were opposed to the people, it's just that they were more conservative than the people. For example, there was the July days, I think, around in the month of July, the fascists wanted to march out in the streets and essentially go knuckle up with the communists, you know what I'm saying? And the workers wanted to head out into the streets and the Bolsheviks didn't. But they eventually had to go along with the people. You know what I'm saying? That was one of the moments I remember. That's an example of the Bolsheviks sort of being behind the people. There's a lot of things I learned in this book. I gained a lot of respect for Trotsky, more information on Trotsky as a man, though he's still a bit mysterious because I expected him to write himself more into the story. So yeah, that's when I picked up my gun and I busted it at the roof. You know what I'm saying? But really, he only tells like, you know, a few of his speeches, and he gives a lot of room for criticism of himself as well. He's quoting like his ideological enemies who are saying like Trotsky was a madman. You know what I'm saying? So shit like that. I also, you know, gained a lot of respect for Lenin. Found out Lenin, you know, was a pretty funny and affable dude. That's what I got from this book as well. But there's still a lot of mystery about Trotsky in the sense that, you know, he wrote himself sort of like as a background character rather than one of these main primary characters. Now, keep in mind, he was locked up in jail, you know what I'm saying, for much of this story. But yeah, that's one of the things I got from this book. There's a lot I got from this book. You know, some great quotes. The nature of man is naturally conservative. We shall now proceed to construct a socialist order. All power to the Soviets. There's so many bars in this book. You know what I'm saying? I feel like if I read this book, you know, 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I'd have much more to take from it too as I continue to grow in my Marxist understanding. So yeah, there's so much great stuff in this book. I'm very glad that I did it. Shout out to everybody who joined. Lemony Fresh Pine says, liberal is one of the meanest things anyone could call another. I know. I'm sorry I'm so late. And it's so fun to just hurl liberal. See, we concede so many things to the right wing that we even let them have the fun words, like the L word. All right, the more I learn about Trotsky, the more solid he seems. I used to be on the infighting of Trots versus Stalinists. Yeah, this is another thing too. After reading this book, I'm not going to be on that edge. I still disagree with Trotsky's preeminent idea of permanent revolution. I'm not a Trotskyist. Even though I read probably Trotsky's longest book, I'm not a Trotskyist. And I'm not convinced about permanent revolution in the sense that I think it's dependent upon a framework that is not necessary. You know, even when we look at the Russian Revolution in Trotsky's mind is framed as an anti-colonial revolution and a revolution ostensibly, let's even give it a little bit of stretch. I'm going to stretch it a bit. I might be reaching a bit. He's ostensibly saying it's a revolution against colonialism and racism to some degree. He's saying that Russia was a backwater. They were in between Asia and Europe. You know, they were being exploited on both sides, seen as lesser men, et cetera, et cetera. He's making the argument that many people before have made when they say we're going to pick up the banner of socialism in Africa, in Latin America, in parts of the melanated world, to say the least, right? So Trotsky is like, in a way, he's a contradiction to his idea of permanent revolution. Trotsky's idea of permanent revolution rests upon that European advanced economies are the ones who are most likely to save the world because those advanced economies will have the power to implement socialism the quickest. And what are we seeing now? What are we seeing now in the 21st century? Whether you like China or not, you know, China is actually the second most powerful economy in the world. You know what I mean? They produce everything in the world. We are sort of beholden to China and the CCP by extent, and they will probably continue to grow in importance and cultural and economic dominance throughout the rest of this century. Most likely, China's trajectory is only up. China's trajectory is only up. They do have demographic problems, there's more men than women, and they're below replacement level, et cetera, et cetera. But if China can overcome the hurdle of national chauvinism and racism and start allowing immigrants in, there might actually be an opportunity for the country to continue its upward trajectory and also fight against the repressive elements of their country. For example, in China, there is a lot of sexism, racism, xenophobia, nationalism, homophobia, et cetera, right? These struggles are still ongoing. So, Trotsky's idea of permanent revolution is important in the sense that it's unifying for the world. Permanent revolution helps us remember that I have more in common with a poor Iranian, a poor Cuban, a poor Venezuelan than I do with rich Americans like Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and, all the other idiots of that administration. I have more in common with a working class person in Cuba than I do with, my boss in America. Okay? That's what helps us. That's what I think permanent revolution as an idea is important. But, this is just Marxism 101, I guess. And this is also something that Lenin has purported as well. Anyway, Lemony says, I may be wrong, but permanent revolution is more about finding the contradictions within the superstructure and continuously addressing them, but I may be wrong. I believe that's more of a philosophical construction of permanent revolution. There is the appendix section here where Trotsky gives some notes, and there is an appendix here about permanent revolution where he talks explicitly about it. But no, the way he framed it here, when he spoke about permanent revolution, he's always talking in context of England, France, Germany, and the advanced European nations having their workers revolt against the capitalist system and finally protect the revolution in Russia and continue to advance it. In my opinion, this is Eurocentric, it's nonsense, and also it's historically untrue because the people that pick up the banner of socialism usually don't just do it solely because of economic exploitation. Okay? I wouldn't just be, listen, we react to our material conditions. Me being black is a big part of me becoming a communist, living my life in black skin, dealing with white supremacist racism. Okay? Somebody else, I'm pretty sure, somebody else is a communist, not solely because, they have a shitty job and had a shitty life, but because, they probably have lost somebody to one of our imperialist wars, or they're gay in a homophobic society, or they're sick of the sexism, and when they interrogate sexism, it comes back down to capitalism as well. There are many reasons why people pick up the banner of socialism, and I would say very, very few people only do it based upon the economic exploitation part of it, even though it is a large part of it. When I dig down as to why I'm dealing with racism, it's because of capitalism. It's, the big overarching part. But the part to me that speaks the most about socialism and fighting for it and advocating for communism is because of the racism part, which is a larger aspect for me. You get what I'm saying? And so I'm in unity, and I am in collaboration, and I am in solidarity with people who take their own personal problems. And yes, poverty is one of them, but so is so many other things. You know what I mean? They interrogate those and come down to realizing that this superstructure that we live under was created because of capitalism and exploitation of people. Okay? So anyway, permanent revolution is a useful thought to keep in mind, in the sense that, yes, we do have to continue to fight against capitalist forces around the world. And yes, to some degree, Trotsky's contributions to the Soviet Union were all dissolved because of the outside influences that caused the Soviet Union to collapse. The arms race with America was a big reason, in my opinion, for the Soviet Union not being here around today. You know what I mean? If you start investing more in guns and bombs and weapons and nukes, you're going to have less money to give to the people for consumer goods and comforts and things like that. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. That's just a brief summary of what I learned from this book. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. Shout out to Lemony Fresh Pine. Shout out to ACD for joining the live stream. Shout out to Kareth. Shout out to Harvester, I guess, for at least doing engagement. Surprised he didn't get banned. Shout out to Laser. Shout out to Nelson Moreno as well. And everybody else who joined the live stream. We're going to close the polls right now. Let me see what you idiots said in the polls. Let me see what you proles said in the polls. Ha, 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 ha. What did you proles say in the polls? Let's go to the horizontal live stream. The horizontal live stream is loading. Okay. Okay, we have to send some people out of here. Okay. All right. Hold on. Now I can't zoom out. I hate this. Okay. All right. So which is more important for a successful revolution? We have 3 votes. Mass participation by itself. Oh man, I can't see the poll. Okay. All right. Which is more important for a successful revolution? Mass participation by itself, 67%. And unsure but fuck Trump and MAGA got 33%. Absolutely. All right, lovely. I like that. Let's go to the vertical live stream poll and see what the people say. All right, we got a lot of answers here, 39 votes. Okay. So, can lasting social change happen without taking state power? Yes, mass movements are enough. No, political power must be won. Depends on historical situation. 36%. All right. So the one with the most votes got 36%, and that depends on historical situation. 28% said unsure, but fuck Trump and MAGA. Okay. 23% said no, political power must be won. And 13% said yes, mass movements are enough. I generally like that result, but the best answer was no, political power must be won. You have to have political power and legitimacy to have lasting social change. Right now in America, you know, we're dealing with people who took away our right to vote as black people. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't have that, you know, right for our voices to be heard, like in my home state of Louisiana. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, these are the end results of the polls. Okay. Thank you so much for joining the live stream. We're shutting off the live stream now. I might take a break for maybe a week or so. You might not see me on live for like a week, you know, so I might still upload some stuff, maybe some videos, some shorts. I might practice making some other type of content. But this has been very draining. It's hard work to do the episodes, but hopefully you enjoyed this. And yeah, shout out to all my commissars, all the people I met on this journey, and shout out to everybody else. I'm so tired. We've been going so hard. Yes, we're going to take a little break. Shout out to Lemony Fresh Pine and everybody else who joined. All power to the people. All power to the people and the Soviets, man. And peace.